Good evening. Thank you. My name is Richard Hardaway. I'm a member of Maryville Town Council, and I am here to welcome you to this evening's tax talk, Maryville's tax talk. I'm here to introduce the panel. We have a distinguished panel. We're going to start with Megan Damron. Megan is the Chief Financial Officer for the Maryville Community School Corporation since 2021. She has over 20 years of experience in finance and with 13 years being school finance. She is a member of the Indiana Association of Schools Business Officials, in which she has completed the Chief Business Officer and Human Resource Specialist certification programs, as well as a graduate from their Leadership Academy, and won Treasurer of the Year for the Region 1 in 2017. Her undergraduate degree is in Business Management from Missouri State University and a Master's in Business Administration from Keller Graduate School of Management. She resides in Schererville, Indiana, and for the past 23 years, and is married with 2 children. Our second panelist is Nicholas G. Brown, Dr. Nicholas G. Brown, who was appointed as the Superintendent of the Maryville School Corporation effective July 1st, 2018. His vision for the Maryville Community School Corporation is to be a student-centered, highly effective educational environment where everyone focuses on excellence and where respect, fairness, transparency, confidentiality, and shared governance are a part of every aspect of the organization. He began his teaching career in 1991 as an Indiana elementary school teacher before accepting the position of principal at Shelbyville Central Schools in 1998. In 2001, Mr. Brown was named the principal at Center Grove School Corporation. He accepted his first superintendent's position at Porter Township School Corporation in 2005. Before becoming superintendent at Hawthorne Community School District 73 in 2012, he earned a Bachelor's of Science in Business and Teacher certification from Indiana University, Indianapolis, his master's degree in school administration from Butler University, and his education specialist degree in school administration from Indiana University, Bloomington. Our third panelist is Maryville Police Department Administrative Assistant to the Chief of Police, Lori Stenfatello. Lori is the Police Chief Administrative Assistant, the Maryville Police Department. She has been with the Maryville Police Department for 7 years. Lori successfully directs a variety of topics and tasks for the department. She not only assists the Chief of Police in the daily operations, but also performs numerous budgetary tasks, including human resources, specific to 61 sworn police officers, police budget and finance, ordinances and resolutions, legal maintenance and secretary, among some of the jobs that Lori performs daily. She excels in budget and financing, evidenced by how she manages the police department's budget, accounts payable and accounts receivable, and oversees all financial decisions made within the police department. These are skills she has brought to the Maryville Police Department through education and her previous experience working for the Fortune 500 company Allied Waste Industries. Lori's intimate knowledge of the Maryville Police Department's inner workings allows her not only to complete her duties, but also play a crucial role in keeping the Maryville Police Department ahead of the game and on the right path as she manages the police department's $7 million budget. Next person is our financial advisor to the town of Maryville, Trista Hudson. Trista works for Sender and Dalton Financial Advisors. Trista joined Sender, Dalton, and the municipal finance work in June of 2019 after 18 years in the legal field. She has unique experience of having served on the City of Valparaiso City Council, including time as the council president. She has also served in several positions on her church's board of directors and is presently a member of the board of managers. She works closely with the town council in preparation, adoption, and monitoring of the town budget. She advises on major purchases and assists the town with creative ideas on how to fund needed purchases or projects with the limited budget that the town must use. Our next person is LWG CPAs and Advisors, Robert Swentz. Robert is a member of LWG's Governmental Services segment and a partner of the firm. He also serves as the compliance officer for the firm as required by the rules established by the Municipal Securities Rule-Making Board and Securities and Exchange Commission. Bob is the town council's expert on tax increment financing, TIF, direct rules and regulations, and guides the town on management of the funds and permitted use of the TIF district funds. Finally, our final panel member is Maryville's town manager, Patrick Reardon. Pat brings 38 years of expertise to urban and brownfield development. As executive director of the Hammond Urban Enterprise Association, which he co-founded in 1984, Reardon oversaw the development of a 4-square-mile area that has a mixture of industrial, commercial, and residential properties. He was the project manager for the 160-acre EPA Brownfield pilot project and Superfund site that became West Point Plaza Industrial Park in Hammond. Reardon's educational background includes a BA in political science from Loras College, a master's in public affairs from Indiana University, an executive management certificate from the University of Notre Dame. He has additional certified training as an economic development finance professional and an industrial revenue bond financing and tax increments financing. His duties today include oversight of all town department budgets, as well as managing the day-to-day operation of the town with department directs reports and implementation of town council documents. He has been with the town of Maryville for 5 years. That would be our panel tonight, our professional panel. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the town council president, Mr. Rick Bella.
So, Sean, did you pick up on a theme here tonight? IU? Kind of, okay. Just want to point that out. Yeah. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to our Maryville inaugural town tax talk. This evening's been planned in response to many suggestions and comments about sharing more information on town government. Your requests for information and desire for a better understanding of how your local town government works have led to this tonight. What's going to soon to be is a great presentation. The TED Talk style presentation tonight is about the complex topic of municipal taxes. And when I say complex, it is extremely complex. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer period with our presenter and a special panel of experts that Mr. Hardaway just introduced. For this meeting, panelists were selected who have insight into pertinent current town topics. Our presenter tonight is Michael Griffin. Michael brings over 35 years of service in federal, state, and local government, 30 of which were in local public finance. As Highlands Clerk Treasurer, Michael also served on the staff of former Congressman Pete Fliskowski, and he recently served as the Indiana State Senator representing District 1. While serving as senator, Michael was named one of 4 co-chairs of the bipartisan Bicameral Trail Caucus, which addresses issues relevant to statewide system of bicycle and pedestrian recreational trails. He also served on the Senate standing legislative committees, including local government, finance institutions and insurance, veterans and military affairs, and homeland security and transportation. He was also named by the Senate leadership to further serve on a variety of interim study committees. As Highlands Clerk Treasurer, he was the responsible officer for an operating budget of over $18 million, a combined budget of over $38 million, and managing payroll for 113 full-time and at times 200 part-time employees. Working with 6 different town councils, he established a reputation for integrity, intellectual leadership, commitment to the highest standards in the practice of public administration, public finance, and professional comportment. He wrote both the first and most recent investment policies adopted by the municipality, conducted over 30 discrete financings, and successfully advocated for the implemented a reserve policy that would promote sustainability and foster resilience through changes in economic cycles. Michael participated in the founding work that led to the formation of the Shared Ethics Initiative, now in 23 cities and towns in 3 counties, that provides training to the member units to raise the ethical understanding of workers and officials. Michael holds the professional designation of Certified Public Finance Administrator, conferred by the Association of Public Treasurers of the United States and Canada, and was the second person to receive this designation in Indiana. He also holds the designation of Master Municipal Clerk by the International Institute of Municipal Clerks. Michael's achievements don't stop there. He received the Norman E. Tufford Leadership Award, the Indiana Governor's Distinguished Hoosier Award given to him by Governor Holcomb in December of 2021, the Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs Public Service Award, the Russell J. Lloyd Distinguished Service Award, and the Financial Management Award for Excellence in Municipal Finance from Accelerated Indiana Municipalities, the highest award conferred by the association. He is an adjunct university instructor at Indiana University Northwest and a frequent presenter at topics related to public service, good government, ethics, public finance, parliamentary procedure, and a history of regional reform, and the municipal clerk's profession throughout Indiana and neighboring cities. Michael has a BA from Indiana University Bloomington with a double major in political science and religious studies. He holds a Master of Public Affairs from Indiana University Northwest School of Public and Environmental Affairs. He is luckily married to Christina Griffin, and his other life project is their daughter, Abigail, who will enter high school next year. Good luck with that, Mike. Please help me in welcoming tonight our guest speaker, Mr. Michael Griffin.
Hello, everyone. That was very generous. I feel like I'm a servant-hearted leader, and that's the tall grass up there. And I like to be kind of a mover when I'm presenting. It's sort of my style. It must be nervous energy. So will you forbear me to do that here as I present on these topics? I'm very honored to be joining this panel and to be invited by the leadership in the town of Maryville because they wanted to present this to its public, the people it serves. And I did something similar to this in the town of Highland. I called it their Treasury Talks. Tax Talk is probably much more pithy and got you here. And it also is true that we want to talk about that as well. Now, I've got a lot of slides, and I want to have enough time for us to have meaningful questions. So I'm going to go through some of them very quickly, and some I'm going to go right past. And the goal will be that you can get access to these either in copies that may be made by the town of Maryville, or if you don't think you're going to get one, I'll be happy to send you a PDF of that. If you contact me at the end, I'll give you an email address to reach me. I'll make sure you get it. Because there's a lot of cool stuff about Maryville in here. And Maryville's got a lot of cool stuff going, fiscally speaking. It's a general service government, Maryville is. Maryville was incorporated December 31st, 1971. It would have incorporated under all the regular laws of the state of Indiana, and it could have, except it was proximate to what then was a law that barred people from getting incorporated too close to a neighboring city. It's a real problem because cities everywhere else in the state of Indiana like to have between 1 and 4 miles buffer between them, and that just wouldn't do. I live in a community that's in North Township. There is no space between any communities in our township, so the moment you go from town of Highland to another place, you just look at the color of the street signs, and there you'll know. That's how you do it. Now, that was a little funny. Okay. By the way, I meant to wish you all a happy Flag Day. I'm not going to go through this. All this tells you is the kind of government you're living and being served by, that you have a town council that does legislation and fiscal authority for your town. There's a town council president, which is your executive, not the same kind of executive that a mayor has, but still a municipal executive under Indiana law. And this tells the history of this and how it became a legislative body and not a body of commissioners. They haven't been called town boards of trustees since 1990. And in 1980, there was a comprehensive reform for all local government that really made towns be, don't laugh, weak mayor council models, cities in Indiana be strong mayor council models. And you're saying to yourself, we don't have a mayor here. No, you don't. But you have a municipal executive elected from the membership of your council who is the president of the town council, here with us, Rick Bella. And you also have an elected fiscal officer, elected townwide, your town clerk treasurer, who is also clerk of the legislative body, and their very famous power is they get to hold on to the town seal. That was my favorite part of the job. I've spent much more time on money, but I loved having that seal. And there's a town manager. So Maryville, and roughly, I think I say the year back in the other literature, decided to convert itself to a council manager form of government, which means they have an administrative head who is hired for their professionalism. In fact, they adopted that in their local ordinance, which was pretty cool, and that is Pat Reardon. Any questions about that? I'm not going to go over this. This tells you the 3 ways that we organize municipal government in the United States. There will be a test at the end if you want to ask me questions. That, though, is the organizational construct. Now, mind you, this is a little bit not like perfect, because in Maryville, the people are in charge, as they should be everywhere. They elect the council members by district. So if you live in Maryville, you get to elect the town councilman, one town council member, 1 clerk treasurer, and 1 town judge. And then the 7 of the members of the council get together and they appoint the town manager. And those are the boards and commissions that I'm aware of. I added the Works Board because under Indiana law, the town council is the Board of Works. That's why they can do all the contracts. And you probably care about them when they contract to make your streets get paved. They do that too. Those are the identifiable department heads that I could find in the code, but I didn't want to venture to see who got them appointed and where they responded to. I thought it was enough just to list them. So I hope that helps you a little bit. This is what I want to start with. So everybody be patient with me. I am a public finance nerd, and I love teaching this. And why I want to give you like a mini lesson in economics. Milton Friedman, the late guy, would be proud of me. I could talk about a pencil as a fungible good. But I want to tell you this, because it will help you understand what local governments, state governments, county governments, even the federal government engage in, and it also helps you understand why we fund things the way we do. So, these are really big words. The first one is non-appropriability. Here's what it means. A pure public good has to have all 3 of these qualities. One of the qualities is we can't figure out how much you're utilizing of a particular service to be able to charge you back the cost of delivering it to you. So here's a question I ask all my classes and everybody that I've ever done this presentation for. Raise your hand if you're getting national defense right now. What? You all are getting it. Raise your hand. There you are. Thank you. You knew. Everybody should raise their hand. How many of you are getting public safety? Thank you, at last. We know how to measure that. When I was growing up, the first exposure I had to municipal government was a late uncle that I loved very much, but he was a frequent guest of the Highland Police Department. That is to say, it's jail. And we didn't get our taxes to be affected by that. We were big users of the public safety system, which led to the correction system eventually, but we didn't get our taxes to be influenced by that. My Uncle Virgil's gone, may God receive him, and now we don't get as much direct service from them, but we still pay taxes to support them because we want to have all their readiness costs so they can do it. So that's what non-appropriability means. We don't know how to figure out how much you're utilizing it, right? Non-exclusion, I love this. We can't deny you from a pure public good whether you pay us or not. So, a good example are parks. You can go right by a green space on a park and no matter what you do to avert your eyes, I don't want to pay for it, I'm not going to look at it, but it's there serving you. You cannot deny service. Also, my favorite example is you pull me over for a ticket. Mr. Fratello, the people that you work with might do that. I would tell them, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't pay my fee to be pulled over for getting a ticket today, so you can't give it to me. Oh, no. They're very happy to give that to me, and they'll do it with a smile. So it's unrelated to exclusion. And lastly, non-exhaustion or non-rivalry. And here's what it means. There's really no other way that if you produce another pure public good, it's going to compete with another. And more importantly, non-exhaustion, they don't run out. Public safety doesn't run out. Now, they'll tell you they get tired delivering it, but that's people. As a principle, justice and public safety, they don't run out. McDonald's hamburgers do. That's why you have to go back and get more. So there's the matrix. Not me, but it's really smart economists. I'm actually showing off for Pat Reardon because he really knows this stuff. Really smart economists said that there's 4 basic goods, and we're talking about like widgets or goods in economics. And this is designed to show you, if you can see me, everybody, when you're looking over there, public goods are opposite of private goods, meaning they have to have all 3 of these qualities, and a private good is the opposite. It is appropriable. I know how to charge you for that hamburger when I make it for you because I know what my cost of delivering it to you was. I know how I can exclude you. You don't pay for that, I'm not going to give it to you. That's why we take the money first before we give you the tray. And lastly, they can run out. I can run out of beef and not be able to serve another hamburger. Does everybody get that? And public goods are not, okay? And then there's 2 other kinds that are sort of closely related, and they're next to private and public goods, and common pool resources have qualities of both private and public, and so do toll goods. The best example is the toll road. It's called a toll road for a reason. In fact, most of you don't pay to go on your roads directly because we've had a tension in our government for a long time. You've already paid once for that road, either directly for a toll or indirectly through your taxes, your gasoline taxes when you fill up, and how the state distributes that money if you're in Indiana to help pay for them, or bond issues. Roads are a toll good. And toll goods are goods that they have a little bit of a private sector quality. So here's an example. You'll see one up there. No, it isn't up there, I guess. I didn't put it up. Have any of you ever called for an ambulance? When my late father was going through congestive heart failure, we had to call all the time. That is a toll good. And you're going to say, wait a minute, don't they have to come? Yes. We have laws that said, toll good or not, in an emergency, you've got to come. But then they try to bill you. And the reason is, we think the public part of that good is the readiness. The on your mark, get set parts of that service, meaning we got to train the EMS, we got to have the trucks ready to go. They got to be trained, you got to have the supplies. So it's on your mark, get set. Then you call and you immediately go. And now you are the only user, not me, of the medicines that you get. I may never call because I'm trying to be this remarkable healthy guy. I'm so asthmatic, I'll call. Are you with me? That's a toll good, okay? Examples of that might be bus fares. Perfect example of a toll good. You're never going to be able to recover that. By the way, anybody ever have a public pool that you've operated? Public pools, I love to say, are a bigger drain from the water supply? No, from the fiscal supply, because to make a pool safe and ready for you to swim in, I could not charge you an individual rate and recover. You'd never come. It would be too high. So we subsidize a little bit of that, and we charge a reasonable fee so that people value that service. It's a toll good. The best example I can give is Parks and Recreation. We're in a recreation center. We offer toll painting in our community. Toll painting. I can see some of you are as thrilled as I am. Now, we offer it because some people really love it. So now the public has said, we're going to offset your costs by having a building in place. They'll do the hiring of the teacher, but you pay for that class. Because I'm a taxpayer that lives there. I don't mind if you take toll painting, but don't charge me for it. That's why toll goods work, because we're able to offset the appropriable costs to the user. Everybody get that? It's a little bit like the private sector, but it's also more public sector because we subsidize the costs that would make it a barrier for you, like the pool and frankly like the bus. Is everybody with me? Okay. Now, common pool resources. This is my favorite. They have this quality of being appropriable partially. You can't exclude people, but they can be exhausted. And the example of that is water. You all in this community are getting your water from a for-profit, but this applies to them. The economics is no different. Water can run out. So we price it in such a way that we can measure how much you're using of the water, because we need to get a recovery of that cost back. And if you're at American Water, they got to give something back to their investor-owned shareholders. But we also want to have a pricing scheme that punishes you for excessive use. because we don't want you to waste the water. If we just charged you 50 cents per 1,000 gallons, you could run your hose all day and never care and come back in a week. That's not good for anybody, is it? It's definitely bad for water supply. So that's the best example of common pool resources. It's also the reason why you have to get a hunting license in any state, because we regulate the wildlife of our state, because it really does belong to the people of Indiana under all the legal theories. But sometimes we want to get you a license because you want to hunt for the joy of it and the sports, but you also help us regulate the populations, because I live near the Hoosier Prairie, and a lot of those deer come over there, and it's like, what is that called when you go to different houses and try a little bit of food? They come in our entire neighborhood. My wife's hostas never survive because they don't want to dine over where they live. They like coming around. And they've gotten so bold, they just show up. I've driven home at night sometimes, and I've looked at them. They're in my front porch practically in the yard, and I look at them, they look at me like, what am I doing here? I live here. I get their point, though. They were here first, but we moved them out. But we're so near that. The point is, hunting licenses help regulate that, because you could theoretically exhaust and extinguish deer, but we also want you to help us regulate for reasons of humanity or humaneness, because if the population gets too big relative to the food supply, they starve, and that's a terrible way to go. Is everybody with me? Okay. And then we've already talked about toll goods. Private goods, basically, I love to use a McDonald's example. I know how much to charge you for it because I know what I'm paying the guy to make it and what the supply was. We can get you to not use it if you don't pay me. And I also can, if it runs out, it's a private good. Everybody get that? Why that's important is public services deal in these three grids mostly. Sometimes we look like that. A great example is, anybody ever been to Disney World or Disneyland? That is a culture and recreation facility that is investor-owned, and it's a blast. I went on my honeymoon, and my daughter went about 4 years ago. We had a blast. I have to go back because they have all the Star Wars stuff. I want to get on that Millennium Falcon. I mean it. But we also have public parks that have amusement rides. The water park that the county financed, we all paid for. Why would we do that? Because we made the barrier to entry less, and it's a toll good, and we believe that there's a benefit in making that accessible. We're not going to do anything as elaborate as Disney, but we have something available that everybody can use, and we believe that there's a public good. The legislature of every state, including Indiana, long ago said culture and recreation are good public goods, and we're going to give you a means to operate them and have them. That's what that's about. Are there any questions quickly? Good, I'm going on. Now, this is the other thing I want to emphasize, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts. Here it is. That list is exhaustive for every type of government revenue. I didn't make it up. Every revenue you can get, whether the federal government, Maryville, Snyder, the Mosquito Abatement Special Service District of Cook County, there they are. They include taxes, which we're going to talk about extensively tonight. Secondly, they include user fees and charges. We're going to talk about that too, because we like those for when we can appropriate the measurement. They're really good for toll goods, right? That toll painting class, that's why we do it. Fines and penalties. Now, I put that up there. We do get money from it, and my tension always with the law enforcement side is if they have a really productive time, they want that to become part of their budget, and yet I'm saying, no, we shouldn't make that too much of the revenue stream because I have an ethical tension, because we don't want to reinforce the stereotype that at the end of the month, if we're a little short, we just get a little stricter about traffic enforcement, and that's not what should happen, and I know it's not what happens. Everybody with me? Exactions. The most questions I get is about that. Nobody does this anymore because most builders come in and they don't want that. They want to tell you exactly what they want from you, taxpayers. But exactions used to be all the time. Planning commissions would meet. A developer would come and say, I need this zoning to do the thing I want. Well, you met most of our specifications, but you're a little ahead of us, because where do you want to do that? We don't have enough infrastructure in. The roads aren't wide enough. We don't have enough curbs and storm drainage. And so often what would happen, and we need to have an upgrade of the traffic light, often what would happen is they would exact contributions from the developer. You probably think it's extortion. It's not. But you have something that they don't have a right to, but they want, and you need them to want that because you're regulating uses, because you don't want to build your house next to the big smokestacked old factory, right? That's why we do land use through zoning, to keep that aside. Although I did attend a church once in my life that did not care that the zoning said that you could not be near personal sex services or you couldn't be near bars. And my church would have loved being next to them. They would have hassled them all day long, but that's another story. Most zoning prevents those because they're incompatible uses. Do you get that? You understand? Now, we don't also allow them near schools. Anybody in teaching, you probably would like to be nearer, the bar sometimes, but we don't think that's good. Assessments, you probably have dealt with. Assessments were very popular. They still are kind of used. There's a body of law that still is in Indiana. It's called the Barrett Law because it started with a guy named Barrett. They're in all the states. We use an assessment system to try to recover the costs of giving you in advance. It's sort of like getting the creditor as the taxpayers. So we put something in for you and you can pay it for us over time, but it has the force of law. It can be treated like a tax. They're not done a lot. I think my community was doing a bunch to do road improvements in older parts of town, and it really works, and they get collected on a tax bill. We can talk about that specifically if you'd like. And lastly, license and permit fees. Why would we do that? It's part of how we get regulations paid for, but also it's to deal with that other issue of the common pool resource. We need to regulate it, so you have to have a license to access hunting, for example. All good. There are only 3 types of taxes, no matter what they tell you. We're going to talk tonight about the food and beverage tax. It is a form of excise or sales tax. There's income taxes, which are inherently progressive. That means you cannot change their character. It's like teaching a crab to walk straight. You cannot do it. They're inherently what they are. But you can make them less or more so progressive. An argument could be made in Indiana. We have a flat rate for the income tax. So while it is progressive, based on ability to pay, it could be more progressive if we had it graduated for higher incomes to pay a higher rate or lower. The federal government's done that for years. Illinois just adopted a regime like that. Excise taxes are about 2 things. They first started out how we paid for a lot of the ATF in the early parts. It wasn't called that then. It was the Treasury Department. And they paid for you to have alcohol, so you get a little tag on it. It expanded to tobacco regulation. That is what excise also as well. Sometimes we call it a tariff. Sometimes we call it, your tag on a cigarette or something. And we do that often to do 2 things. It is a revenue generator, but it also is to pay for the regulatory regime of enforcement. And we don't want you drinking too much, so we tax it. We don't want you to smoke too much, so we tax it. Now here's the ethical quandary for people in public finance. We don't want you to smoke, but man, we get that check from the state of all the cigarette taxes they collected, we put in the general fund. We need it. Now, we've moved off of that more and more. When I started 30 years ago, it was a significant part of our revenue stream. It's not so much anymore, but there's still a little bit of it left, and it pays for capital items. That's a general revenue side. It's not a very big number, but I wanted to tell you about that. And then lastly, the most hated tax of all taxes that all 50 states have, plus DC. So why would they have the one hated tax of all taxes? Property taxes. And it is inherently regressive. In fact, it is unusually regressive. So why would you do it? We're going to tell you why tonight. That explains what a regressive tax is and what a progressive tax is. And that's an example. We can go back to later if there's a question about it, but I really want to get to the other stuff and then hear from the panel. So will you forbear me to move ahead? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying nothing. I'm going to take the yeses. The yeses have it. Now, government type activities are all of those. These come from public finance reporting requirements where we have a common vocabulary. So we classify what governments do at the local level as general government. That's town councils, clerk treasurers, and the like. Public safety, that ought to be obvious. Fire protection, maybe code enforcement, also it could also be planning, and as well as fire and police. Culture and recreation. We're in a building that represents that kind of an expenditure. That's what the chapter or the article is called in the Indiana Code when it deals with parks. So parks, festivals, all of that. Highway and streets, that's obvious to all of you. Sanitation, I put a little bit of a dot on that. For the longest time, that used to mean street cleaning, but it also now includes stormwater management. It's because of the evolution of the EPA and trying to regulate that, but just think of that. But it is about also picking up public waste. Now, in your community of Maryville, you have an indirect service. The town, to its credit, has decided to try to bid that to give you an economy of scale, but you still individually get billed by the provider that they pick. So they give you the benefit of that. They just haven't got the infrastructure and human resources or capacity to actually have it added because they don't have a utility already. A community like mine that had a utility since 1925, it was founded in 1910 for both water and then sewer, it became pretty easy for us to add to that bill because it had the same rate user base. the cost of us providing and managing through a combination of not privatizing, but doing outsourcing for components of it, the waste hauling. But my town also, when it was starting, had bought a bunch of garbage trucks and then had to liquidate them. So we had all this capacity that we got rid of, and it really has been smart. And they did it, a lot of people did it earlier than I did. The last is interest on long-term debt. Yes, when we pay for debt for public goods like roads and streets, that is a governmental function, economic development and urban development. They're all part of the same. This is a product of that as well, okay? Business type. You only have one of these, but a lot of places actually regulate potable water, the water that you can drink. A lot of places also do wastewater management, which is sewage, and stormwater management, which you do provide, and then sanitation and solid waste indirectly, as I shared with you. However, it's common to note that a lot of places do this. They still have strict rules on what they can charge for that, and so it isn't like, a lot of people will tell you it's a moneymaker. That's not true. Government can't be profitable lawfully, but it can have surpluses, but these have to be run like an enterprise without the profit motive. So it does cover the costs of a number of things. I can talk about that, or the panel can, later this evening. And your stormwater utility is called the Stormwater Management Board of Directors. Now, this is what I want to get into as well. This is the vocabulary. Why do I share that with all of you? If you're going to make your elected officials accountable, and they want to be accountable to you, or they wouldn't have held this, you've got to know the vocabulary and what we're talking about, because they're going to use it too. First, a levy. That levy is not L-E-V-E-E. That's the levy to keep the water out. This is the L-E-V-Y. And it is basically the tax that you impose. Most of us in local government, when we talk about the levy, we're talking about the property tax levy. But it also is the sales tax levy, which we don't impose. And it's going to be the food and beverage tax if the council decides that there's a public interest in doing so. It has a levy too. It's just imposed over a different tax base. So now I talk about the property tax base, which is a different kind of thing to talk about. The sales tax base, well, I'm really going to look at it discretely as a form of a narrowing of it, which is the food and beverage tax. I'm going to add this. Remember I talked about regressivity? One of the things about the sales tax is it's inherently regressive. We try to avoid that, meaning it tends to fall hardest on the people who have the least resources of disposable income after they meet all their demands to pay it. But when you have a food and beverage tax, you've taken a regressive tax, it won't not be regressive, and made it less so. And my example is food and beverage taxes get paid by all of us, but they also get paid by businesses, and businesses mostly don't pay sales tax. Think about that. If they pay the food and beverage taxes, they often have business lunches, and that gets picked up, and they are not exempt from that. You've made it less regressive, not progressive, but less regressive. I said that to show off for the public finance mavens on the table because they think that's cool if I know that. Now, we use fund. I have heard funds all the time used. When I say funds, like I say to my daughter, how much funds do you need? I'm asking her how much money does she want from me. But a fund is a specific accounting entity that is used in government. It actually was a brilliant invention. It's not done in the private sector. It's done a little bit in the not-for-profit sector. A fund is the basic accounting vehicle. And so when we talk about budgeting in any city or town in Indiana, and this is true throughout the country, a fund is essentially budgeted at that level. It is the place into which money gets deposited, and each fund becomes its own limitation. We like to say the general fund, which is the most important fund for any community. The way we describe it, though, is it is a fund into which resources and expenses occur that don't belong in another fund. Doesn't sound that fancy, does it? But that's the accounting definition of it. So far, so good? So that's the fund. Maryville has 90 of them, 90 funds. My former position, we had 64, and we need to get that down. But the state legislature loves to make a new fund every time we get a new funding source. 43 of those funds, the town of Maryville, to its credit, annually budgets through the process. And they're not required to do all 43. They're only required to do the ones that have a property tax levy and the 2 funds that deal with road taxes, local road and street and motor vehicle highway. All the rest they're doing because they want to have a good budgetary discipline and practice, because as the fiscal body, they want to maintain good controls. So there it is. 90 funds is a lot. Think about it like this. You have 90 checking accounts. That's where it was born from in the evolution of historical public finance. Now, they don't have 90 checking accounts, by the way. They don't need to do that anymore. And if you do, Shame on you. Get those consolidated. You can still tie them to a fund. That's too much reconciliation of a bank account, which will be work, too much work. But the funds are discrete. They basically help you decide and help the public know, as well as lay members of boards and commissions, how much resources they have and what they can be used for. Generally speaking, except for state laws that bar certain things that local governments can't do, the general fund is the one place you can spend on anything, provided you have the resource, and you can put anything besides the property tax in there as well. You can't, unless you've decided to do something else. Then you have a whole body of things called special revenue funds, like your park fund, if you have one. We don't have one here. We have a park non-reverting, and so on. Any questions about that? And the fire territory here is kind of a hybrid. It's basically a consolidation of what was your former Ross Township Fire Department and the civil government of Maryville. The civil government of Maryville is the lead participating body, so it keeps the books, but it allowed them to expand the tax base beyond just the corporate boundaries of Maryville, which allowed them to give them training, and it has its own maximum levy, it's on top of or in addition to, not the existing maximum levy, which we're going to talk about. Finally, this is my favorite thing to teach about. I actually have department head workshops on this because I get teased about it all the time. So here it is. An appropriation is as old in our governmental scheme as the fight between Alexander Hamilton, a great singer apparently. I saw the musical. He apparently could sing. Oh, I'm just kidding. I did see the musical, but I know he didn't really sing. And Thomas Jefferson, who also sang in that same musical when he got back from France. Appropriations are about the power of the legislative body to decide where money gets spent. In Indiana, it's the same thing. The state legislature has to do it, as well as local governments, cities and towns, counties, special service districts in some cases. And what it means for you is permission to spend, but not a requirement to. The federal government gets an appropriation. The president has to show just cause, like a serious problem, if he doesn't spend everything that was appropriated, because of the fight there and case law that went to the Supreme Court. The power to appropriate is a significant power that's congressional and legislative under their reading of the Constitution, and therefore the executive has no business giving rescissions or cutting anything if the legislature doesn't give permission. Now, there is a body of law that allows a process, but not without the Congress's permission. In local government, that is authorization to spend, but it's not a mandate. I know department heads, I got all this money, I got to spend it. But you don't have to. You may, but you don't have to. Does everybody understand that? And every governmental fund requires this unless state law says otherwise. I actually have the site for you if you'd like to know this, the lawyers in the room. There's several places, but for towns, it is IC 36-1, first off, about where money goes when it's done. IC 3618-6, and for towns, it's IC 36535, which talks about appropriation by ordinance and that you have to have an appropriation before you can spend anything unless the statute says otherwise. If you're a city person, it's 36542. I want to go through this workshop because this will give you the idea of what I mean by this. A fund is like a bucket of money, but it has to have permission to spend on the top. Maybe it's like pudding skin, I don't know. It's appropriation and money inside. So, for any fund, if you have $100 of cash and no appropriation, you cannot spend anything. Even though you got that cash in there, you can't spend it till you get an appropriation. There's a process that the public gets to be a part of that they have to go through, a procedure. If you have no cash in that fund, but you somehow have an appropriation of $100, permission to spend, you can't spend any money. There is an exception to this. You can do it if you're bonding. You can actually obligate that, but in most cases, you can't spend anything. What you must have is both cash and appropriation. Now, very often there'll be more cash in bond funds than appropriation if they've been invested over time. But basically, if you have $100 of cash and $100 of appropriation, you can spend or obligate up to $100. Now, you could have way more cash. Let's say it's $200. You could still only obligate $100 because you got to have appropriation and cash. Now, you can get an additional appropriation to allow you to spend the other $100 there. Everybody with me? It is a way to reinforce the power of the purse for the legislative and fiscal body, but also it has allowed the public to see, hey, wait a minute, we went through all those budget hearings, we thought we knew what you were going to spend on, what are you changing it for? They get to come to a public hearing and say, hey, I thought you were going to put a playground by my house. No, I'm sorry, we had to buy another fire truck because one ran out, and we think that's more important. No, it's not, says the public, but you would wisely, I think, go for the fire truck. That's just me. I get the part next year. You with me? Okay. This basically talks about the exceptions to when appropriations, the rule with appropriations that they expire at the end of the year. The cash doesn't go away if you've got there, but they expire at the end of the year. We call that lapsing. That's true for nearly every appropriated fund except these examples. Capital funds, certain advanced grants. I put that up there to remind me to tell you, you may want to know what a reimbursement grant is. That's different from these funds. I'm talking about funds where they give you, which is rare, we want you to do this kind of patrolling, police department, and we think that the budget for that's going to be $100,000. Here's the money. Put a separate fund together and start doing it. They don't need an appropriation. It's automatically appropriated for its purpose, and you get a separate fund, and that's what you do, okay? But an advanced grant, it needs an appropriation, because you should be building that if you've planned on it in your fund source, and usually it's when they say, we'll give you 20 if you do 80, or vice versa. Everybody with me? So a lot of that stuff needs to go into the fund where the service that you want the grant to fund is going to be delivered, because we have a state law that says that all posting must be to the fund in which the expense arose. That's the language. We can go back on questions on that, but I want to get through all of this. And then agency or clearing funds and insurance funds. If anybody has a self-insurance fund, it doesn't lapse until the money's gone. That's state law too. Now, budgets. Do you mind if I take a quick drink? How am I doing? Not bad. Okay. 3 elements of all budgeting in the United States, private and public. First, you have a plan for spending. Council starts that process. Then you have to have a plan for resources to support the spending, revenue, or cash on hand. And then you have to have a method to reconcile the two, which is an important part of it. Because if you want to spend $1 million and there's no way we've got it and we're only going to raise $500,000, you're going to have a problem. Remember that appropriation rule? That's the process. So between May or June, this, by the way, applies to schools you're served by the way, 65%, let me say it differently. Maryville is a contiguous body with roughly a $2.7 billion assessed valuation of property tax net. You are members of bigger AVs. You're only 65% of the Maryville Community Schools tax base. They serve a lot of people, and they go outside of the corporate boundaries of Maryville. So they have a different kind of impact. They still choose to do their tax budgeting the same calendar as most cities and towns, but we talked earlier today. They could deviate because some of their money that comes from the state is still on the July 1, June 30th fiscal calendar that the state operates under. So their fiscal year is actually a biennium, although they still treat it like a year. Beginning July 1, it'll start July 1 this year. By the way, they just passed a new budget. And it will run June 30th for the second successive year, second succeeding the year that we start. So it's a biennium, which is one thing I think they do well. You need to plan a little bit more, even for operations out there. There's other things I could tell you I wish they would do better, but that's not a bad idea. We don't get to do that. We still have to live within the annual appropriation cycle. However, schools could choose to do one, but they're still going to get their money from the state on that other calendar. The fiscal year for most local government is January 1st to December 1st, so it's a calendar year. So whatever budget they're starting on this May and June process now, that'll finally culminate in November of this year, that budget will go through a review process, assuming there's no interesting debt issues. That order needs to be back in the hands of the town by December 31st, telling you this is your budget. And we need to get colleagues that look at that, because sometimes you've passed something and you think it's beautiful, and the DLGF says, oh, we think it's beautiful too, but I don't know how you're going to spend all that money unless you print it. Okay, are you paying attention? Printing money would be illegal? Okay, just checking. It starts with department heads. Most places do this. They give all of their spending hopes, and the proper officers gather this. Here I assume it is in conjunction with the clerk treasurer, it would be the town manager working with your council president. Everybody can do it differently. Then the spending plans and revenue estimates are reconciled. So what happens is that the fiscal officer should be working on the revenue estimates for each fund. They do 40 funds that they budget, 43, excuse me, out of the 90 that they have. That's a lot of work, everybody, because when we talk about the town budget, we really ought to say the budgets, because we budget at the fund level. Every one of those funds is a budgeted entity that has to be reconciled, and it has to be fundable or balanced. And then that gave you what I already told you. All of this stuff has to be adopted by November 1st. It gets filed, and then we hope to get our budget order by December 31st. They've got till the end of January in the event that you've issued some new debt late in the year. Now, property tax controls. This is not caps, everybody. That's a different thing that all the people of Indiana, except me, asked to get our Constitution amended by. I know my wife voted against it too, but most people wanted it, and the reason I was against it is for the things we're running into now. I believe in constraint and being fiscally responsible, but the cap should have been on AVs and not on what turns out to be levies. Okay? Property tax controls have actually been around since 1937. The modern period that we're still kind of under is 1973. First we said you can't make your rates go up a certain amount. Then we said we're going to allow you to take all of your levies that are subject to the maximum levy control, and you can grow them by so much, and they might automatically grow as high as 15% if you're a really big growth community. But we're really kind of living under, I think it's 2008. This basically happened, what we're under now. Now the funds that are under the controls, that's the property tax only. You probably have heard this bandied about 5% growth in that. What's happened is that now we're based on the 6-year rolling average of non-farm personal income. Whatever that non-farm personal income average is, that's how much we can grow. The law says it can't be higher than 6%. Since the law was passed, it's never been 6%. But last year, for this year, it was 5%. Your maximum levy in Maryville has only got 2 funds subject to that, meaning the property tax levy cannot be in total between the police pension fund and the general fund with its 11 departments, and those departments are more budgetary than perfectly aligning with the Department of Service Delivery or an organizational construct, and they have to stay within the maximum levy limitations. So, in Maryville, the maximum levy in 2002, last year, paid 2002, was $7.4 million that had to be spread between the Maryville General Fund and the Maryville Police Pension Fund. Now, the good news is, pensions, you should think, the pension fund that they have is paying off really legacy costs. I don't think you have anybody that's still working for you that's still funded by that. This was the 1925 pension fund. Now, I'm going to do a quick test. What happened? What hadn't happened in 1925 when that law was passed? Anybody that's historic here? The Depression, thank you. It's a pre-1929 law. It's back when we thought we could treat funding pensions like an operating cost with no regard for actuarial science and setting aside for future liabilities. In fact, the law today still bars us from making that fund be funded actuarially. And we've had a variety of problems since essentially 1977 when this came to light, when we got the new pensions, basically that are funded for everybody hired before May 1st. They're in the old system. Everybody hired after April 30th of 77. They're in the new. So nearly everybody is here. The new one is a great fund. It's actually sound. The state manages on your behalf, and you're told what to do. They actually recently lowered our pension contribution for most units instead of tying it specifically to the obligations of that unit. But back to this. The maximum levy for the year we're in became this because the growth quotient was 5%. We don't have the 2024 growth quotient. But I wanted you to see how it's calculated to give you my nerd cred. This data comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is a sub-bureau out of the Department of Commerce. And I used to, when I was practicing, race the person responsible for calculating this to see who could get it earlier. When it got found out that I was doing that and getting it right every time, by the way, they decided they wouldn't tell me the day that they went in because the latter year stuff and some of the early years uses what's called a dynamic algorithm to do the estimates because it's pretty hard for the United States to collect enough data, but they do believe it's reliable, to figure out how much non-farm personal income happens in any jurisdiction, including Indiana, but they do it. So if you get it on one day, it might be one number. If you go 2 days later, the number could change. Those are millions of dollars. So we basically took 2016 over 2017, and we go all the way up to 2021, which put in the year to 2022. That creates an average. As you can see what the average is, the average became 1.052. 1.052 is 5%. Then it compares it to the lesser of the 6% state factor, which will never be that high, and it says 5% is what you could do. And the year before that, I believe, was 4. So you multiply your normal max levy, whether you went to it or not, from 2022, applied it to 2023, and that meant the maximum amount of money you could garner, if everybody will look over here real quick, was this amount. That's the amount that you had to spread between the general fund and police pension. And there's another part of your fund that you have to take into account. This fund is a cum cap development fund. It's based on a flat rate that gets applied to the tax base, and then it gets added to this number to say that's the controlled fund, but that number is really still outside of this. And the municipal cume cap fund is a capital fund. It can be used for a variety of things, which we can talk about. I just wanted to see that. The Maryville Fire Territory, which is 2% bigger, roughly, almost 1% bigger, because 99% of the town of Maryville's in it, tax base wise. It got the 5% growth quotient. So that meant between its general fund could not go higher than that. It's also got a rate that it can use for its equipment that can't exceed, I believe, 33 cents per $100 assessed valuation. Now, I actually want to get through this. I'll do this at the end, but I wanted you to understand that in the beginning, tax rates are outputs, not inputs. They're inputs when you get your tax bill. But they're not inputs then. They're outputs. They're a fraction, everybody. It basically is the tax levy, which is spending, divided by the tax base, which is the AV that we talk about. That equals a tax rate. And that tax rate for just these funds is that. For just that two parts that are under your controls. Got it? This is the total rate because I wanted to put all the other funds that might have property taxes in there. They don't count against that controlled levy issue, right? But I could show you that when we leave the net assessed valuation alone, this is the measurement of the tax base, that's all the taxable property improvements, all the stuff that's here. If this goes up and spending's the same, the rate goes down. If this goes down and spending's the same, the rate goes up. If both go up and this goes up slower than this, they'll be spending more and you'll feel like your taxes went down. That's how it works. Unlike any other tax where a rate gets fixed and it gets applied to a tax base that's transactional, property taxes are a non-transactional system of finance. The rate has to change from year to year, so what we control is the amount of taxes that can be imposed by that jurisdiction, and the rate is a function of dividing the spending you're going to do, divided by the district you're in, producing the rate. Then it gets applied to all your homes, divided by 100.
Michael?
Yes?
The tax levy stays the same and our net assessed value goes up and we see all this economic development we have in town, silos at Sanders Farm, Ameriplex, the White property, that would lower the tax rate on
Yes.
the formula?
Yes.
If the levy stays the
Well, not in the act. It would only do it for the parts that are in the basis, because you named an area that also has an allocation area. But outside of that, yes, yes. Everybody get that? I actually have a really cool thing. I can click on that and I could show you the spreadsheet doing it, but I'll do it at the end because it's for questions. I told you this already. It is the fund balance accounting is unique to government. It basically originally started as different checking books to help lay people do it. Checking accounts, they're not really that way now. You could have one or two checking accounts and have multiple funds. You use accounting to track them. But in force with cash or activity, 90 different funds in Maryville, 43 budgets that it does in the annual budget process, and it does the budgets for its fire territory. Therefore, they do 45 different budgets annually. I assume that will be happening very shortly if it hasn't already. I'll assure the town manager Reardon's on that. I put this up there because I knew accountants would be here, but I'm going to pass it because you don't need to know the types of funds for this workshop. There's the general fund. Those are all the named departments of the general fund. They may or may not align with the department itself. I know, for example, for police, there's some parts of its operating expenses that come out of the income tax fund, the public safety income tax fund. However, by and large, this was originally done for that. Look at all those departments that come out of there. So that means the property tax, a good share of your property tax levy is going to go in there, and a little bit's going to go into police pension. The town council could decide to change those departments, rename them. Because of the size of the town, there's a regulation under the State Board of Accounts that requires you to departmentalize the general fund because you're big. If you're a town below 5,000, you don't have to do this in your general fund, but a lot do because they like organizing that way. And each department has subcategories of appropriations as well. This I want to show you because I used this when I was practicing public finance to help people out. As you can see there, the very top, that is the amount that the general fund appropriated in 2023 for its clerk treasurer's office. The next is for the town council, and I put it under the administration head. So I'm trying to show you these functional categories as well. The next is for planning and development. I threw engineering in there. Sometimes they put it in other places, just what I did. And basically, you see that it represents $745,000. You can see the discrete amount that's been budgeted for each. Culture and recreation, parks and recreation. You don't have a separate fund for yours. It's the department of your general fund. That's where it goes. You have general government, which is your town hall, things you have to do in your town hall, and human resources department, which I did notice was the place they posted a lot of their group buys for insurance. And you have public safety, your EMA department, your town court, and your police department, all of which have those appropriations. Public safety added up to this number. Does everybody see that? I know I should run over there and show you too. I'll come on over in a minute. This is the total amount of the general fund, which is the sum of those departments, and this is the revenue estimates that were used. Now I want to explain, because I'm going to talk about balanced budgets and funded budgets. This budget on its face looks kind of funny, right? Because it looks like all the revenues that we have are only going to be $9.5 million, and we plan to spend $11.2 million. How can they do that? Right? Yes? Nobody gets why revenue being lower than what you want to spend? Yes? Okay. It's because of a technique, I'm guessing. When I started, I did a lot of this too, because the other thing that's in that other revenues box is called excise tax. Everybody who pays their license plate fees every year and cusses under your breath, and sometimes you cuss out loud. I know I do. That money actually goes to all the funds that have a property tax levy by an allocation formula. If your debt service funds, which I didn't show here, also have property taxes, they might suddenly, because the levy shifted, get more of that money than the general fund. It isn't like the same amount every year. So it is public finance defense in Indiana. You do it defensively. You make your revenues lower. Knowing this budget is funded, I'm going to show you in a minute how I know that. More importantly, this budget is technically in surplus if they have the same experience they had in 2022. If you look at the AFR, that's been unaudited, but I think this is faithful, instead of the number being 1.7 million for all the non-property tax revenues, it's 3.1. And I even took out a transfer that the town council made, concerned it wouldn't have enough money to support what was going on. It's still that much money. You guys will remember your economic income tax transfer, probably. See, I really read your financials. Everybody with me? So they're actually operating in modest surplus. Ideally, they should be balanced, but balance is never perfect because revenue is an estimate. It's not, I don't know hard and fast how much I'm going to get in there. And we haven't taken into account the fact that there's property tax caps, and that $7 million is not going to come in at that. If people pay late, there's a problem, but more importantly, if caps eat it up. So does everybody kind of see what that matrix is trying to show? It's cash basis, I apologize, but it's helpful for you to see it. So you basically see that revenue, most of the revenue that goes in there that's a tax at all is property tax, but I want to show you something else. One of the tests that I do, I used to do this in Highland all the time, I noticed that the property tax number, not allowing for what it's going to be reduced by with tax caps, which is not max levy, by the way, is very close to your public safety needs. Public safety is one of those things that you want to use the property tax for, because property tax, why we have it in every jurisdiction of the country for local government and DC is because a variety of economic cycles don't treat it badly. So I know I'm going to get the property tax even if there's a downturn in the economy. And that's what you want to fund police, because you don't want police to be let go because there's a downturn in the economy. An argument could be made if there's a downturn in the economy, you might need them more because there could be a rise in crime, right? So these taxes were to pay for those really purest of public goods like schools. Because if you were promised that you were going to have a, may God bless you all day, if you were promised that you were going to have a ratio of 1 teacher to 15 for grades 1 through 3, and suddenly we have a downturn that was tied to property taxes, it isn't entirely done that way anymore. But if it was, and I suddenly called you, hey, we had an economic downturn, so we're going to have to go to 1 to 45. We had to let 2 teachers go, so instead of 1 to 15 for the elementary periods, we're going to do 1 to 45. But the teacher's really good. You'd be upset. You wouldn't like it either if we said we had an economic downturn, so call our place and we'll tell you if we're going to dispatch a fire truck, because we'll determine if you can just go out there with your hose or not. Because we had a downturn and we had to furlough some firefighters. You don't want to hear that. Economic cycle or not. That's why we use property taxes for those kind of public goods. And so I wanted to show you how close it came to showing you we're really within that ballpark. That's a good thing. I would give this council an A. Those are just examples of other kinds of funds that the town has. Some of the debt service funds have property taxes, some don't. Special revenue funds, in most every case, doesn't, but 2 of them are the income tax. And then I want to show you allocation errors, which we'll talk about later. But we don't need to talk about that anymore, okay? You can get it in the handout. Those are capital funds that they actually have in their financial report. But let's talk about balance. Balance is an ideal in academics. A balanced budget, in fact, nobody really wants one. We want one slightly in surplus. If we're getting equal to everything we estimated, a lot of us in public finance think, man, we could have done better. A balanced budget, though, ideally as an academic matter, is the amount of spending you want to do in a fiscal year is going to be equal to and not exceed the amount of revenue you're going to get to support it. You live within your income. Make sense? The problem is, a lot of local governments, schools have this even more, and local governments, we get property taxes twice a year. Let's pretend it was once a year. So I'm going to hire you to work for me. And I'm going to say, I'm going to pay you $250,000 as your salary. You're going to go, I'll take that job. I hope you'd say that. However, I'm only going to pay you twice a year, 2 halves. And for some of you, I'm going to pay you at the end of the year. Now, you know you've got a guarantee of your salary. You stay healthy and you work. So how do you fund what you've got to live on? Because you've got a house to pay for and all the things you have to pay for if you've got a family. You have to have casual deficits, or you might temporary loans. Believe me, I'm not joking. That is not too far off from what schools and local governments experience. So they try to have fund balance on hand. They sometimes have to do temporary borrowing to cover costs, because the first 2 weeks of the year, every employee in your town or city wants to be paid. Go figure. Why are they like that? They won't work for free. But they want to be paid. And the way we pay for most public safety people is from that source. Does everybody kind of get that? Okay. A funded budget is what we mostly live in. In fact, that's how Maryville likes to do some of it, because they know they've got cash that's unobligated on hand. So a funded budget says that my spending is not going to exceed the amount of money I'm going to raise in a given year and the amount of money I have on hand. If I have no money on hand, that doesn't become a funded budget anymore. It becomes a deficit. Everybody get that? Okay. Here's the example I want to give you. Balanced budget. We have unobligated cash of $100,000 on hand in a general fund. You took in $2 million. You've planned to spend $2 million. And at the end of the year, you still have that $100,000. That's balanced. That is rare, everyone. I strived in my other work to try to get to balanced budget, and we still did better. Of course, the budget chair and I were trying to get a surplus because we needed it to help us through the pandemic, it turned out. We were thinking of something else because we worried about tax cap loss. There's a funded budget example. This looks a lot like what's going on in Maryville, although they really have a better surplus. $100,000 to start off with. They're going to get revenues of $1.9 million. $2 million expenditures. The cash is diminished by 50. They can't do that all the time. So they're watching all the time. They're not reckless, but be aware of that, okay? So here's what I did. I had to do this when I was trying to prove the fact that we were meeting our surplus targets in my old work. This is cash basis. So here it is. General fund has $11 million. Remember, I showed you that number before. It has income from property tax and from other income. But remember, I want to remind you, their other income from the prior year was $3.1 million. So I think that 1.7 is profoundly understated for reasons to make sure you're going to get all of the excise tax when the budget order comes back. You can see that they have a net income of 1.6 negative. However, your cash balance started off with 4.7. And while I can't say this for sure, because I did not go into the offices to check if there was any carryover obligations or payroll that was earned in December but would be paid the next year, absent those encumbrances or those payables that would be from the revenue, most of that 4.7 is available. It's unencumbered. It's unobligated money. You with me? The other controlled fund is the police pension fund. Police pension fund is done this way because a lot of this gets paid for by the state now. They have a property tax relief distribution that they give us every year now, because they realize if we were funding this actuarially, it would be too much money. And they know that the property tax there is competing with the property tax for the general fund. Because the more we put in the general fund, that means that $26,091, because the maximum levy can't exceed that bigger number, would get, if we put more money there, we got to put less money in the general. Everybody with me? And some places have multiple funds competing for that. So it's always that tension between there. Maryville doesn't have those issues, which is a good thing. And you have a cash balance. This is what is necessary to pay the people who are retired that were in a 1925 plan, a non-actuarial plan. And generally it's funded in the level that you need. And you can have a little bit of money on hand for people because there's a death benefit that comes out of it, like $12,000. But they'd have to be the people who are retired. They're not the people who are still working for the town. They're all now moved to the state multi-agency fund, which is the public safety fund, and used to be PERF, it's now INPERS. I thought you might be interested in a couple of other funds or condition at the start of this year. They believed the motor vehicle highway was going to need spending of $1.5 million. The distribution I split because In 2016 or 17, Ed Soliday wanted to try to improve this. He actually had the gas tax raised, and then it came back down again for another story because they got to repay underpayment to Marion County. So we got to pay that off over 10 years, so all of us got less. It wasn't just Lake County. It was the rest of the state for Marion County because of a mistake that had historically been made in calculations. You have to split it to do some on preservation and maintenance, which is new pavement, and then the other one is for all the other things you can do with it. And you have a net income of 82.9. That's actually pretty good, and that's your cash balance. Not dividing that in half for this, but I just want to make you aware of that law. And I wanted to tell you something about this, because you have a wheel tax here, and I commend you for that. I wish we did in my town. When I was first elected, I saw I had $500,000 in the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund, and I thought, oh my God, $500,000, that's real money, man. Boy, did I not know. Partly that pays for the administrative costs associated with the street department, that's one. But two, the cost of a road. There's 180 miles of it's actually almost 181 in Maryville, 180, but they're center lane miles. In an urban area like this or a suburban area, we do 4 lanes most places going both ways, right? So it's way more money. I determined, this is 3 years old, it's got to be a worse number because of inflation and the cost of oil. It costs between $162,000 to $175,000 a mile to lay pavement. We never got that much in our MVH fund or LRNS to do that in any given year. In fact, based on the money you get in your wheel tax, you could do every road and street, assuming it's just a resurfacing and not reconstruction, which is a whole different problem, in 36 years, because you have 180 of them. Based on the amount of money you raise every year, which is around $600,000 to $800,000. Thank you. And it's, by the way, smart because people who drive pay the tax or have vehicles that could drive. So we took who benefits as a theory of public finance. So that's why you did it. And the beauty is, of course, to me, I hate more funds, but the legislature wanted to have a separate fund so the taxpayers could see what's in there and what your elected officials are doing with it. There's the local road and streets. The difference between the two, this does big streets, this does little streets. There's more and more they can do the same. I once begged them to let Highland be a demonstration project, just combine them, and I had a lot of colleagues statewide, no, we need them separate. I don't know why, but we do. And you have to do a budget for each, but there it is. Fire Territory General Fund. It has its own max levy. They allowed for $2.7 million. Remember their January cash balance is $2.9 million, so they practically have enough to cover them for the year. The property tax is $2.4 million. They get other income of $251. Some of that is like excise tax, but they also have some licensing and fees that they get as well. And they're still, based on that budget, at a net negative income of 98, but they have huge cash reserves. So the change in the cash balance will be true, but this is what they'll end. And that assumes, by the way, this all comes in the way we said, and they spend every dollar. A lot of the departments in Maryville budget high and spend low. And that means the appropriation lapses or expires, and if it was fully funded, which in the revenue sense, for the year it was underfunded because we were funding the budget, balancing it, that money would stay in the fund that it was intended to stay in, and that's what they're doing. This is the replacement fund. It gets a separate levy not to exceed, I think it's .0300303. This is to do, but the beauty of this is, everybody, Maryville is 99% of that tax base. It's not 100% of it. And you give fire services to the portion out there, you now just had the fire department not have to compete with the police department anymore to be well funded. This is the brilliance of this. This is why a lot of us want it. It is a new levy and tax, but public safety, you don't want us to just basically say, I wish we could do it. You don't want that. It's one of the fundamental reasons that government exists. The Immune Cap Fund, this is a fund that in 1984 got established. It used to be we had a bunch of cum cap funds in the state of Indiana, but they were hard to manage and they often were affected by the caps. In 1984, they called a super cum fund, and this fund basically is outside the max levy. And up until we passed an income tax in Lake County, the tax rate couldn't be higher than 4 cents. It's not going to be as high as 5. It never gets there because they do an adjustment for windfall, but basically you're getting the max you can get, and that money doesn't go away, it just builds up. So the budget there doesn't have to be budgeted like an operating expense. Cum means it'll accumulate, and you can use it for a variety of purposes, mostly capital. You can even use it to pay debt, and so on. This is your wheel and surtax fund. Now take a look at that $830 that you budgeted for. You're going to have net income of $6,000, so this is budgeted in surplus. And what I told you was their ending cash balance, they have a lot of money. They must be saving up to do one-time expenses. They're definitely covered. And again, at $800,000 a year of income, right, $836,000 that comes from everybody paying their wheel tax, you could do all your roads, assuming that $160,000 number to 175, you could do them in 36 years. You're not probably at the highest level either. Are you? Do you know? See, they could make it higher and we could get it done quicker, but they didn't want to overburden you on your cars. I know my wife and I have a car. My daughter's going to get old enough soon to have a car. Then I start thinking, oh, a tax on every car? On the other hand, I'll just say, well, you can walk a lot of places, Abigail. We'll just have the car for school. Anyway, I won't do that. It's not a mileage tax. You also get income tax. It's been divided in two. We didn't impose that, the county did, but the state law governs it. An economic development local income tax, which is really to be used for economic development purposes and any other use if you need it, and you do that here. You basically budgeted for $660,000. You're going to get $750,000, and you'll have a 90 net income, and it just stays there if you don't use it. You'll notice that there was no January 1st cash balance. This was also a source for buffeting or augmenting the general fund to make sure that there'd be enough, because there was a concern probably about October when you start thinking about this. Are we going to have enough? Because you don't really know how much money you're going to get for the year till the last part of the year when you get your tax settlement. You have no idea. I was calling all the time. Do you have a sense of who's paying, who isn't paying? And by the way, the finance director would hang up on me a lot, so that's how I am. Public safety LIT, public safety uses, police, fire, and there you see how it's positioned. It does have a negative net income, but it does have a positive cash balance, and I know that your fiscal leaders are watching it. I love this, and I thought about this long and hard, and I knew that there'd be school people here. So, they have a different assessed valuation, because you realize the town of Maryville corporate boundaries for tax base is only 65%, maybe 75%, of the school community, okay? In order to get the impact on you as a taxpayer, I had to adjust this so that you're not shown paying for what everybody in the rest of Ross Township and all the other places it serves are paying. Get me? So as part of your property tax bill, Maryville corporate boundary people, it's 39% of your tax bill. Another way to say that is 39 cents of every property tax dollar you pay back goes to schools. And their levy that I used on this is at that 65% base was like 2.2 million, or 22 million. It's 33 million. So another way to look at this, you got economies of scale. Now I know big classrooms is an issue. The superintendent will probably talk about that. But you got economies of scale for public education, which is no small trick. Just saying, that's a delightful thing. I'm going to show you how that looks in a minute. Then all the rest you can see, basically 20% is Maryville Civil. If you include the fire equipment and then the fire territory itself, you add 5% to the Maryville Civil, and it's really 25%. Maryville Conservancy, for some of you that live there, it is 5% of your tax dollars. The county library is only 3 cents. By the way, I love county libraries. Nerd, remember? I read a lot of that form of government. By the way, they're committed to telling you things. So if you go there, the government won't tell me this. They'll tell you. They'll look it up. You've got to love that about libraries. And the Lake County Solid Waste Management District, the township, and county government represent those. I worked on that pie. I double-checked it. I had a panic 2 nights ago thinking I got it wrong. I went back and checked. I got it right. There it is. Isn't that cool to have? You should put that on your wall, Mr. President, just as like a decoration. Now, this is what I was trying to point out to you. Assessed valuation means the measurement of the property tax base for the purposes of governing and raising property taxes. Maryville Civil has got an assessed valuation for 2023 of 2.17 more billion, not million, billion. I envied you. When Highland hit $1 billion, I went, we're in the money. I went and looked at what you had and I felt depressed. You have a lot of tax base. Maryville Fire Territory is just a little bit above you. That's why the percentage of civil Maryville is 98.9, which is another way of saying 99%. As you can see, the community schools is only 65% of the civil tax base that taxpayers in Maryville pay for. Got it? You get 100% of the school for 65%. That's another way to think about it. That's all I'm going to do that's nice, okay? Because we're going to talk about tips, I'll have to say something nice. Okay? Maryville Conservancy District, I put too many L's in there. It was late, I apologize. It's 77, almost 78%. And so the property tax levy that you have down. Maryville, the 100% is what you're getting for all the things I showed you before, but this is kind of good to keep in mind that you have these overlaps that really tie you into a larger community. Now, whether the school is too big for elementary, that's a pedagogical, I said that to show off for Dr. Brown, a pedagogical issue, meaning a way in which we instruct people. That's a fair thing. That's something that they have to deal with within the constraints of the way that we pay for schools and his need to want to deliver student-centered, I believe you said, student-centered education. It is a great school. My wife is a Maryville alum. She's really smart and really pretty too, which proves there's a God. Look at me. I got a beautiful woman who's smart to marry me, totally feeling like nerd triumph. We want to talk about the food and beverage tax, and then I'll be done. As you know, the legislature just recently authorized 3 new communities in the state of Indiana, one of which was Maryville, to be able to have a food and beverage tax. And remember I told you that is a tax on just delivered prepared foods. There's a whole definition in statute. And those delivered foods tend to be what you do in McDonald's. I used to tell my graduate students when I would teach them about this, Brown County and Nashville have one of these too. But it pays for, does anybody know what it pays for? I can't wait to tell you this. It pays for bathrooms and paving for parking lots. Now, why do you think a community of about 400 people needs that? Tourism, yes. Everybody, it's an artisan colony practically. And boy, they're not going to be popular if they don't have enough bathrooms. And you won't like going there if they're not clean and new and good. So they have a level for that. And I think that I'm doing my part to help extend them if I go to a restaurant there or I stop at the Dairy Queen, which is a must for me and my family. And we know that we're contributing to bathrooms and paving. We feel good about that. Here, your tax, if it gets imposed, will pay for something else. This tells you what the parameters are. The town council can have other things on the agenda, but it has to be the most specific substantive thing on the agenda. Your lawyers will talk to you about this, but I'll bet you they'll say it might be nice to have just that on there and maybe pay a claim or two. You don't want to pass a new ordinance or any of that because it might be substantive. It says it should be the most substantive thing on the agenda. And you have a public hearing to talk about what you do with it and what the impact would be when they go to restaurants. Food and beverage tax rate must be imposed in increments of 0.25%, meaning 0.25 for those who'd like to do the calculation, all the way up to 1%. That's the max we can have here. So the technique, I did this too because I wanted the public officials who'd be here to actually know what happens. Unlike some of the other taxes, they get theirs basically within 30 days of passing the ordinance or the date that they say they want it to be effective, whatever's later. And that gets done, you turn it over to the state revenue office, and the treasurer of state is to begin, once it's in collection, I don't know how long that'll take, but they're to give you a monthly distribution that'll get to the clerk treasurer's office, the fiscal officer's offices, gets deposited in a separate fund. There's that legislature again, putting it in a separate fund. And there you have it. And you'll establish, the clerk treasurer has the authority under the statute to just put it on the books, a food and beverage tax receipts fund. I love funds that have big names. They make me crazy. But there it is. And if adopted, this will terminate, as well as the law that allowed them to do it, July 1st of 2045. So they need to probably start thinking about this if they want to use it, especially if they're going to do a long-term financing. And remember something that we think about, or I think about all the time. We want to borrow things with a good useful life. Would you take a 60-year loan on your car? You shouldn't. Your car might last that long. But why you wouldn't do, or 60-month I should say, why you wouldn't do that is you want the borrowing to be aligned with the useful life, not the design life. I've had cars last 10 years. My car out there is, in fact, this is an 11th year. But you want the design life, which you should have a capital asset policy that says cars are going to be 3 to 5 years. Fire trucks will be 20. We have that policy. You might have one too. And that's how you decide how long you're going to pay for it. You don't want to be paying on a car that you've long since demolished and it's gone and you're still paying on it. That's not good. Everybody with me? See, public finance isn't hard. It's what you guys know intuitively. It's common sense, right? That's what the council is establishing with. So here's what the money may be used for. This is right out of the code. And even though it was passed in House Bill 14-something, it's now codified, put in the code, the organization of all the laws of public import by subject matter. It's an IC code 6-9-54.5-9. It tells you that it can be used for park and recreation purposes, which includes the purchase of land for park and recreation purposes. It also can be used for tourism-related purposes, for facilities, including the purchase of land for park and recreation and tourism purposes. and you can pledge the money to pay bonds and leases to support those other purposes. So they probably are not going to wait till this gets saved up enough. We'll talk about that if we get questions at the end. Make sure you ask me about generational equity, why we don't do buildings on layaway, and I will explain to you why we don't do it on layaway for a good, solid public finance and generational equity reason. London Witty Group, Bob Swince that is, did a lot of research. It's difficult to get data about food and restaurants that have a sales tax. It's 7%. But we could inadvertently try to figure out what that sales base was. Because it's difficult, he went ahead and got other data that he gathered. He did a cool algorithm, and he believes that the food and beverage base of Maryville, by the way, he wanted me to stress to you this is conservative, and I believe him because I've contracted with that firm before, and they are. They don't overestimate. They believe that the food and beverage retail base is $180 million annually. That sounds like a lot. I know that when Wendy's does this strawberry frosty, I really contribute to this a lot. But now, not so much for the chocolate one. If they adopt at the 1% level, they'll produce $180 million. Minimal, we think. Could vary, remember. Sales tax is very sensitive to changes in the economy. But generally speaking, we think that's good. In fact, remember we have to adopt it at the 0.25% level. So every 0.25% we add on produces another $450,000 of revenue based on that data. Everybody kind of get that? So they could do to, I think they can go right to 1. They don't have to wait, but they can't do anything like 1.7. They got to do 1 at the max or 0.25 at the minimum. Does everybody kind of get that? And each has its, now, I will tell you as a finance officer, if they intend to use this revenue to build a new building, and I tell them they shouldn't, I hope you people are saying, don't save up the money till you have enough. That's what I do when I wanted to buy a new tie. Not anymore, though. I have good income. But when I was younger, but you don't want to do that with a public asset. And I'll explain why at the end when you ask me about generational equity. I thought you might like to take a look at some of the places that already have these food and beverage taxes throughout the state of Indiana. And I think it's interesting to tell you a little story about that. There's about 4 places up there that actually get to use theirs for not just specific purposes that are named. They're listed in the handout. But they're actually used for and any other money that would be lawful for a municipal purpose. When you read that, that means anything that's lawful. It means it's general revenue, okay? These places are Lebanon, Zionsville, Carmel, Noblesville, and Westfield. Greenwood, not so fast. They don't get it. You may not remember this. I just read a piece in the historical guide of one of the things I get from the Indiana Historical Society because, again, I'm a nerd. And it talked about this was a deal that the governor at that time, Daniels, personally went and pitched to all the cities and towns. He wanted them to agree, if they would agree to let there be a tax imposed, not directly by the state, but by all the county councils or all the jurisdictional places, to help pay for the Lucas Oil Stadium, a far finer place to play football. I've never played football in there, but I know it's a cool place, and we got a Super Bowl because of it, so that's cool. He said he would authorize that the law would allow for them to take the existing food and beverage tax and use it also as not just to finance Lucas. So basically, you've got Marion County and the collar counties contributing with its food and beverage tax to Lucas. And not Greenwood, though, because the Greenwood mayor, I happen to know him, said, I'm not doing that. So he didn't get any money. He has food and beverage, but he can't use it for any governmental need. And if you take a look at, like, Boone County's getting 1.17, some of these places get some serious money. You can look at them at your leisure. I want to tell you about retail sales tax in the country. These are about the four highest regions: California, Illinois, New York, and Michigan. Now, we always worry in public finance, will that be an arrestor on consumer behavior? It can. So I always worry about if there's a sales tax just in Maryville and not one surrounding it, a general sales tax, I might want to drive to the Target, not here, but the Target over there, where they don't pay it, because I might do that. But you'll be surprised how much what we call demand elasticity there is. There's a lot. People don't usually, they'll pay the extra because it's convenient. But you're not doing that with food and beverage. That doesn't have the same kind of elasticity problem. So one community could have it, and Maryville's not small. It's big. And you have a lot of people who come here because you have this beautiful array of restaurants and food and beverage places. Not just Wendy's, but nice steak places too. Are you with me? Okay. So we look at this to see. So now I'm at the question part. I thank you for the opportunity to show my public finance nerdiness. I do have other materials if we need it based on your questions, and I will make a point if you haven't asked about why we do debt financing for buildings like this, which I hope Maryville will consider when they decide to use, if they decide to pass this tax after they get public input and use it for some of the things they want to do with this building and some others. I hope that they do some debt financing when the markets, we have the inflation rate coming down. My I bonds now are at 4%. They started at 7%. I almost wanted to put $10,000 in, but I didn't. My I savings bond, by the way. I'm talking about bonds of the federal government, not bonds I sold as the local government. But if they get that good rate, that can really return something for them because they can pay for it over time, well within the useful life of a building. And there's generational equity, which I'll explain in a minute. Unless you want me to do it right now, I can do it really fast. Let me do generational equity real fast. Is that okay? If we did a layaway, a pay as you accumulate process, let's pretend I just moved into Highland, I'm single, I have a small house, and the council there decides they want to put a tax on to build a beautiful park for everybody. So I'm paying this tax every year. They say they're not going to build it until they get enough. I meet a woman, like I told you, who's beautiful, and I can't believe she's married to me. She got to my house. Then we had Abigail, so we get a bigger house, and we do all this stuff. Then Abigail goes away and marries somebody, breaks my heart, and moves to Connecticut. My wife and I get a smaller home. We decide we're going to move out to Connecticut, and we sell the house. We've lived there 20 years. That's a life cycle, right? A family life cycle. We've been contributing to this thing to get this park with public money. We move to Connecticut. Sean decides he doesn't want to be a Maryville councilman anymore. He buys our house because it's really nice. Yeah, it's really nice. Yes, it's a Cape Cod, so it's a story and a half, but it's really two. And he moves in right across the street from a school, so he can sell it for a lot of money later, too. And he gets that big park, and the tax stopped. How is that equitable? I paid for 20 years for a park I never saw, right? He gets there, I paid for his park, and he gets it without having to contribute at all. That is generational inequity. Why do we do debt? We do leases and we do tax debt because everybody basically, every year we're paying down some of that debt. We're all contributing in equal measure because we have to make taxes uniform. We do it in equal measure, so everybody's getting equal buy-in to the value of that park, whether they use it or not, and the park goes up right away. So nobody has to wait 20 years to get that. So sometimes debt is good. Now, I was raised in a really Calvinist family when I was a little kid. Debt was wrong. I remember my first big coat from Robert Hall was layaway. Made sense for a family. For public entities, it's inequitable. We're denying people access from financial resources we're taking from them now and saying you've got to wait to a future time. And it may be so long you get no benefit, and your neighbor who buys your home gets all the benefit and didn't pay any of the costs. Lucky for you, Sean, but not equitable. Do you get that? That's why they do debt financing for so much. And because none of us could afford our house. Well, I shouldn't say that. I couldn't have afforded my house without a mortgage. I had a good income, and I knew that I'd be able to pay it over the life of my family, but I didn't have that kind of money to lay out for my house's value. So mortgages are another way that we create generational equity. Does that make sense? Because I need the homes now when we're having all the kids and stuff. I don't need it later when I'm retired and it's just me, and I'm flirting with the old lady down the street because we're both widowed. Are you with me? I know I went through a lot of stuff fast, and we will make available to you, I believe, a copy of the full handout, and it's acceptable. If you have questions about that, I'm going to remain. But I really want, I don't know if anybody else wants to, we've been introduced already. We want to turn this over to your panel, who are super able. They are the tall grass when it comes to this subject. And so I guess the plot is for you to come up if you have a question to the microphone, because they're recording this so everybody can see it on your town website, and you won't be heard if you don't use that, and then it'll give them a chance to respond. I thank you for being tolerant of me this opening, and I will be here for other questions, but I'm going to listen too because they're really smart.
Excellent presentation. I just want to say thank you so much for coming. Even thank you all for having them.
Me to do it, so they really did the heavy lifting. I'm ready to show off about money all the time.
All right, great. And panelists, thank you for coming. I just wanted to make the comment just in regards to the taxes. I know that every sounds like every country, every county, and every state in the United States has property taxes. And property taxes to me are offensive because that means you really don't own your property. If you don't pay your taxes, somebody can take your property. And that's definitely one of my concerns. Tax sales are a major issue in the town of Maryville, Lake County in general. People coming all over the country just so they can buy property that have been seized from the government. We have a very low tax rate compared to Illinois. So one of the things that I wanted to mention, particularly in regards to the community center, I understand the concept of the 1% sales tax, and I was opposed to the 1% sales tax. I understand that it could be useful looking at some of the examples that you provided, particularly in the sense that if we use that 1% sales tax to reduce people's property taxes, I would love that. But it's not going to be used for that. It's going to be used in this particular instance to fund an expansion of the community center. And I think that from my experience, we don't necessarily need that because unlike other communities, we have a beautiful facility across the street called the Maryville High School that you just pointed out we're only paying 39% for. Everybody else is helping us pay for it, Crown Point, Hobart, whoever else is feeding the entire school system here. And I believe that versus just expanding the community center, which we do need to do, there are certain things that need to be added here, but I think there are some structural issues that the town needs to address before we actually impose a tax to pay for the community center. Like, why is everybody in the community paying for a community center that they're not attending? The people that come here like me should be willing to pay a fee for it, because that's one of the issues that people are concerned about. The fee just needs to be something reasonable. And I believe that one of the motives that we had in building what's called a community center is so that we can host large events. And if you look at a place like Hammond, they have this huge sports complex. And I love the way they designed it. It's a beautiful facility. It was designed to be a sports complex and host big events. But even with their very large events, they still have a need to use a school corporation at times. And I believe that we need to work on versus just going into debt and building things bigger and better. Let's work with what we got and work together across governmental boundaries so that we're not increasing our debt and figuring out a way that we can do things in a more sustainable way that's low tax and efficient. And by the way, my name is Eric January. I'm hoping to be the next clerk treasurer of the town of Maryville. I just won the Democratic primary. So I'm really deeply concerned about tax. I'm also a CPA, just like a couple of people up in the panel. And but I really appreciate what you shared, and when I had my hand up earlier, because I wanted the presentation. and I definitely want the presentation. I just wanted to make that comment, and all of the other things that you mentioned, they're right on point. It's just my concern is before we actually add another dime in taxes, let's make sure we're doing all that we can before we impose taxes on anybody else. And I don't feel like that we've exhausted all means right now. I may have another comment later just based on what people say, but I just wanted to share that. And if you all have anything that you wanted to say about that, I think that, and when I make that example, use the example of the school corporation. When I lived in Dallas, I lived in 5 states across the United States: Virginia, Philadelphia, Texas, Illinois, Indiana, even Oregon for a brief time. So I lived around the country and I had a chance to see how people did things differently. And we're in Dallas. I was really shocked that how they poured all of this money into their athletic facilities, but then at night, those athletic facilities that were part of the school corporation became the park district. They didn't ask people to pay another tax for what they already had. They were going in there using the same weight room that these athletes that were flying all over the country to use. I mean, they didn't. And I feel like we need to look at how other people are doing it versus just tax and spend. Because, I mean, Maryville is a great community. It's got a lot to offer. And I believe that our tax rate can actually be better and lower if we stop with maybe some of these large abatements that we're giving large corporations, and not necessarily like over 10 years, maybe a 3-year abatement. And that way the homeowner is not footing the bill for a corporation like Domino's. That's a large publicly traded company. But I can go on and on. I don't want to take the time. If anybody else has a comment, please make a comment.
Michael, Thank you for presenting. Just for the benefit of everyone in the audience, I want to clear up something with the help of Bob Swentz. Most of you know I'm Sean Pettit. I'm the Ward 6 councilman. I also happen to have the pleasure of being the RDC president for the past 17 years. This facility, Michael, you talked about, we bonded. We did 2 bonds. We did a $12.5 million general obligation bond because debt was falling off, Bob, from the other bond issues that we had in the town of Maryville. We also did a TIF-backed bond out of the Maryville Road TIF for $12.5 million, which means the big businesses that are out there, guys, Meyer, all those areas in the Maryville Road TIF, we collect 100% of the money. You showed the pie chart, Michael. In a TIF district, the town gets 100% of the money. Schools don't. Thank you, Dr. Brown. We get 100% of that money. So when Bob and Tom Pittman created this financing mechanism for this building, we did do the 2 bond issues. However, those were done before several large developments came in. And yes, we do give tax abatement, and that is part of the economic development landscape. You have to be giving tax abatement. You're going to lose the company to another community. So we've given tax abatement. What Bob and Tom have done for us, for the benefit of the town of Maryville, we retired that $12.5 million bond on the taxpayers' back, and Domino's and Silos and Amazon and all those big boxes that everybody was controversial about, they're paying for this community center now. The residents are not paying for this community center any longer. Am I right, Bob?
So, yes, we're going to start using, Bob, use the microphone, I'm sorry.
We're operating at a deficit. We lost $600,000 in the community center last year. The residents are paying going to the general fund. The big residents about that.
So beginning in this budget cycle, what we've determined is the tax increment areas that we have around the town will generate sufficient dollars so that we can use those to pay debt service, and will reduce the tax rate that's currently being used to pay for those bonds.
When is that projected to happen?
In this budget cycle for pay 24, because we already had the 23 budget done last year. So as we do the 24 budget, the tax rate for those payments will fall off, and the tax increment will pay 100% of the debt service. So as Sean was saying, the big boxes, it's the Mississippi Street retail, it's the Ameriplex Park, the Maryville Road retail. Those tax dollars are going to be used to pay the debt service.
There's the list of all the ones that are established. The top 4, I believe, 5, they're the ones that are generating increment, tax increment. And the way to think of this is that's based on what was in the your AFR that's published, your annual report. So this is through 2022. It doesn't tell me anything about 2023. And all it's telling you is that you have about $260 million worth of AV that you're able to capture to generate something with, not that 49-cent rate we talked about for the civil town alone. That's what they get to use right here. You see at the bottom here? This number, 24469. That rate is the aggregate rate because Maryville is treated for tax purposes as a district. So all the overlapping things, the public library, the Conservancy District as well, they go through a whole list. The township itself is a township government. All of those add up, plus the corporate rate, the school portion of the rate, the 65% that affects it becomes 39 cents to you all on your property tax bill, per dollar you pay in your bill. So it becomes that. It generates that much money. That's as of 2022. So then I wanted to do kind of a cost-benefit analysis. Here's what the town is giving up. It's giving up nothing except it has one fund that has a flat rate. Did everybody get that? It gets to be almost 5 cents. So if we delay putting on AV, that's a loss. Here's how much it is. $3,148.19 applied to that increment, that AV. Is everybody with me? That AV up there, the captured AV, which equals that 260, that was the amount of money we generate. Does that make sense? Everybody get it? That's the whole number of all the overlapping districts. You won't, if you would give up all of these allocation areas, you would not have you'd have the money laying in there, no new money coming in, and you wouldn't get a windfall. There'd be a slight reduction in rate, but not much. And look what you're giving up for all those good public goods. And I'm telling you, for roads alone, This is my outside view at 175,000 per mile. 36 years is too long. You're doing a lot of your heavy-duty lifting off of those. They can be controversial. Schools, I'm going to say this. I'm probably one of the few public finance officers who will say it. Before 2019, schools had a legitimate beef that, like that, the schools used to have flat rates for a couple of their capital fund, and I think one transportation fund perhaps, that were flat rates as well. An argument could be made that that deferral of that AV cost them, and that could be measurable. But since 2019, that's not true. Firstly, the general fund is all done by the state, and they have a floating levy in the rates and output, like I told you earlier, how it's an output for us. So it doesn't matter. If that was on, their rate would drop slightly. If it is not on, it goes up. And there is one other argument, although I get eyes rolling when I say this. This is not supposed to be used if you can't defend it, but for your plans for it would not happen if it didn't happen. I always felt that when there was an argument that we were denying access to this tax money, or this tax base, to the schools, and some other districts complained too, that it was a metaphysical argument, because you're actually arguing to me about the thing you want to get a benefit from that wouldn't be there for the very tool that you're mad that we have. I also realize that sophisticated educational executives who have to do the finance side probably get that there's that but-for test is a high bar sometimes and not so high others, but they could have made the argument. So I say before 2019 there was an argument to be made. However, there was a lot of laws in place. For example, if with the permission of the council and the redevelopment commission, they could be getting significant monies out of there for any of their remedial education, their training for SHOP, we used to call it, things like that. They can make contributions like that. There can also be home rule agreements where they may not have an entitlement to it, but there could be agreements to parcel it over. And now I was just advised about a law change effective July 1st where salaries can be used for this. I just don't know if they can be outside of the town's salaries. Yes?
Michael, we were approached about, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, we're recording. We were approached about, Rich, I don't know, it's been going on 7, 8 years by the school corporation before Dr. Brown came on. Dr. Sperling, I think, was superintendent. Dan Bowditch came to us about requesting the 15% of the total tax draw.
Right.
Bob analyzed that. We had given them a grant of $325,000 a year for 5 years for a career counseling program.
Nice.
We had a lapse there for, I think, about 2 years, Dr. Brown. We just now are going to, at the July school board meeting, award them $400,000 for the CTE program, the improvements at Filer, and one other, Dr. Brown, I can't remember. Truancy Court support. So the RDC and the town council do realize we have a partnership with Maryville School Corporation, and we'll be making that $400,000 award, and I believe it's a 5-year term that we'll commit to.
These are unaudited numbers by me, but as of 2022, I just took a look at what the 3% caps would be for those allocation areas, and their revenue production is always below that because these are mostly commercial, and all the other property that isn't residential, isn't farmland, and isn't homestead residential, meaning you own the house you live in. So it doesn't have an impact on skewing very much. It is controversial. There's a lot of misunderstandings about this in the very beginning. And I was even skeptical about doing debt against it because early on, the debt markets where we try to sell our debt didn't know how to treat this. And we were getting incredible interest rates. I mean, high interest rates, which is the discount cost of money. And it made it harder. That is not true anymore. There's a lot more fundamental understanding. People like Mr. Swintz and people like Ms. Hudson help cities and towns make sure they have certain reserves in place and that the financing is structured in such a way that they can get the best that the market will offer them. So it's not very expensive debt as it once was. And they have tax caps that affect them too. So the 1, 2, 3% that had been modified into the Constitution of Indiana, it affects these collection rates as well. Whoops, I did the wrong thing. And now I'm out of it. I'll have to go back in. I'm sorry. I was pretty good up until this last thing. So I'll open it up and I'll be back.
While Mike does that, guys, there is bottles of water and cookies on tables on both sides of the room. They're for you. Please help yourselves anytime.
Oh, there it is.
And Sean says they're very good. He tested.
There it is. And now I just want to do, wanna
Can
make
I
a
just
list of-
address real quick from the school's point of view, we try to work closely with our town partners in this new grant coming our way. We're very appreciative of with the new CTE building coming in. Part of the money will be used to help support those projects. When we talk about the Filer project, we're trying to resolve a traffic issue on 61st Street in front of Filer by adding an access road through the back off some property we purchased. The part of the grant they're giving to that will actually cover half the cost of that project, which is wonderful. And we think, as we've talked, we think that's just good for the community and safety of our students in our community. And then the other is to help support us with our truancy court, and we have shown that those efforts of keeping families engaged and the students in schools have helped us hit that 93% graduation rate. So those are good investments that we're appreciative of, the partnership that are really go straight to the student, that we really think make a big difference. So just wanted to clarify how those dollars are allocated or plan to be allocated at this point. We appreciate that effort. So.
Hello. I'd like to know how many TIF zones Maryville has.
I had them up there. There they are. I believe that's accurate, Robert?
We did one at the end of last.
These are the ones that were reported based on the financial reporting that the town had to do as of December 31st of last year, starting this year. And I didn't take a look at the new report that you filed by April 1st.
There's one additional one. It's called the Crow Holdings
you go.
allocation area
Okay.
for the, you see the development occurring on the east side of 65.
Okay, Mr. Pettit stated that TIF zone money pays for this, the bond, the high-risk bond on this building that we're in. My question is Indiana Code 36714 states tax increment is to be spent within the allocation area or serving the allocation area. So if we have 9 TIF zones, all those 9 TIF zones can combine to create a slush fund to pay for anything in town? Or do the funds need to be used within the TIF zone according to state law?
Yeah, it's on you, Bob, yeah.
So a couple years ago, there are 4 primary TIF areas. We call them the Broadway allocation area, Ameriplex allocation area, Maryville Road, and Mississippi Street. A couple years ago, for this very purpose, we consolidated those areas into one economic development area, which is also allowed by state law. And by doing that, it allows us to use money that would be generated in Mississippi Street to be used for a project here. There's also a provision of the law that says you can use money that will, in an allocation area that will serve or benefit, and we view the community center as an asset that serves and benefits the entire town.
How does an electrical substation for a private business warehouse, how is that a public use, a public benefit?
I'm not sure what specifically you're referencing.
The silos, the million-plus square foot warehouse, Maryville has a $1.7 million bond for paying for part of the electrical substation that will service that warehouse.
So Maryville did for really the first time a transaction that's done all over the state. It's a bond issued through the Economic Development Commission whereby the developer, the company, enters into the transaction and can use dollars that were generated from the bond issue for private purposes. It's a taxable bond, and they can use it for construction of the building, for infrastructure on their site, for land acquisition, or for really any purposes that they lay out before we do the transaction.
When you have businesses that are getting a tax abatement sitting in a TIF zone, how much tax revenue in total that would go to the school system, how much is the school system sacrificing for that?
Wow.
Yeah, I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'd have to calculate that and then
So
we can figure it out.
it's okay with the school system that they're giving money away to corporations and you don't know how much it is? I just want to understand it correctly. You don't know how much money they're giving, your money they're giving away.
I don't know if I'd answer it that way as much as that I haven't calculated that at any particular point. We get notice if there's going to be some discussions. I don't know if you
Yeah.
reference them.
If you'll allow me, sir, hello. I wish that we called it something other than tax abatement. It's the worst possible rule. It's one of the most profoundly, I love them. They sound awful, but they're really not. Firstly, all the taxes that this place paid before it got there, it's going to continue to pay. It becomes part of the regular tax base. And the best way I can visualize this for you is to say that we're trying to induce them to improve that asset that they have. So we're going to say, instead of immediately taking the tax hit on the amount that you improve, so in a way you have to think about like a base valuation and gross and subtract the two, only let's say it's my house and I just want to add new windows because it's good for the economy and it's also good for the environment. We can't use it for that, by the way, but I'm using the example to try to make it so you can understand. My house is going to pay taxes just like it always did. The difference is my AV of my house might be $250,000. With the new windows, it would be $300,000. The $50,000 improvement that I get will be spread over as much as 10 years, and in some rare cases, you can do more. And we basically say you get to add that incrementally so that you get added to the tax base incremental. They ought to call it tax deferral increment because it's coming on slowly. So it doesn't have the impact. Nobody loses anything. It is a tax shift. But let me tell you, every time you take your mortgage, well, there's no more mortgage deductions now. Every time we take a deduction on the property tax side, it shifts it to everyone else. That's the way property taxes work. So it isn't a loss of money in the same sense. There's this Government Accounting Standards Board, which is the governing board that does the accounting standards for reporting for the for the public sector. They're the correspondent to the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which is FASB. They have these guidance documents that are to be heeded. One is 77 for government. And it recently said that we have to try to tell public in any financial report that we give how much they're losing with tax abatement. In some places, abatement means what it means. In California, it does. In India, it's never meant that. Nobody loses anything. All we're saying is instead of making you get your new AV the first full year it's in service, we're going to allow you to spread that AV over a period of 5 years or 10. Some machinery gets a little bit more. And we might say that you're going to incrementally add it in tenths or fifths. And in some cases, we did this in my experience, we say we'll allow you to get 5 years and you'll be able to be deferred on the new value, but you've got to pay 100% at the very end, and you're added. So it isn't really a tax loss. It's about like an addition on your home, not counting until the end of 10 years or counting in increments of 1/10 until you hit 100% so that you don't have to take the tax hit all at once.
My point is last year I added a deck to my house, and you know what? The Ross Township assessor came, and guess what? I get to pay the tax hit this
Yes,
year.
you're
So
right,
I
and
don't
I
get
feel
to
the same
defer
way you
that,
do.
and it takes 17 years. What you're trying to explain is it's a 17-year deferment. So
It may be. I don't know what the particular
that-
deferments
well,
are.
Their increment table is spread over 10 years, so the first 3 years, it's no tax, and then it builds to 100%. So you don't come to a balance point until 17%. So your argument is that, say I built a facility for $10 million. Is that $10 million facility worth as much in year 1 as it is in year 10? Because it won't, because there's called a
As an economic
depreciation.
matter, it may or it may not be. But one of the things that tax abatement needs, why you can't get one and I can't get one for my deck, I feel for you. This was said to me in a public meeting once as a finance officer. Unless you have a huge family, like you're going to suddenly produce 20,000 children or you're going to have 15 children, all of whom are going to get jobs. The idea is that this incentive has to be tied to not just adding to the tax base, but also adding to the community environment. We might negotiate that they're going to do something for softball for a couple of years, or the not-for-profits. They're going to have so many jobs they're going to give. And unlike redevelopment allocation areas, tax abatement has some potent bills. Every year, they have to come and be reported to the council because they're the only one who get to grant it. And they have to tell that they've demonstrated the reasons for getting that abatement, that they're satisfying. They have to prove how much new AV they did. They have to show payrolls. They have to show new hires. If not, they have to show expansion. And if they fail, the council can decide to say, tell us why you failed. In the pandemic, a lot of people got a break. But if it wasn't for that, there's a clawback provision in the law that allows the town council to say, okay, you now owe us for all the taxes we allowed you to defer back to the start of this, and they get in serious trouble. So it is a really important, it's robust. And is it fair that you and I as homeowners don't get it? The legislature believes that it was important to add to the business and job offerings, and most of us don't offer those in our family lives.
Would you believe that the town of Maryville has no one who's actually responsible for asking the people getting the Amazons, the Domino's? They don't have anyone responsible for saying, how many Maryville residents did you hire? Which is part of the tax abatement.
They're responsible. The grantor is responsible for bringing that report to either the town manager or your economic development director, yeah.
That's fantastic, but there's no one here who can produce that information. I've asked for it multiple times, and we're waiting for census data, we're waiting for something. I've been waiting for almost 2 years to get that data. And I ask about it at town meetings all the time, and it's not given, so I'm just curious.
Brian, excuse me. First, there are several people responsible to ascertain that information, and it begins with the town manager. It also includes the Department of Economic Development. And as Mr. Griffin is referencing, there's an annual compliance. We're in the process of finalizing that compliance now, but I can tell you, having to do with the 5 companies that benefit from personal property tax, their documents show, and our research agrees, that they're in compliance. What that means is that their estimate number of jobs to be created is, if not exact, approximately what they should be. In some instances, they're more. The amount of tax dollars generated from their investment in machinery and equipment is, again, in line with their estimates. And we take this aspect of our job very seriously. And if we need to go to the council through the committee, and then the council as a whole, and recommend a clawback, if you will, which could include a complete dissolution of the abatement or an annual repayment, we're poised to do that. We are, through Angie's office, Angie Chilcott, our executive director, we're in constant contact with these companies, and we're always trying to get this information, because the information that you're referencing is critically important to us. You know, Councilman Pettit often talks about the quid pro quo, if you will, my word. Above and beyond the benefit that companies earn, because keep in mind, it's triggered by an investment. The benefit is maintained because they make themselves available to Maryville residents for jobs. And I can tell you, in my 4 years plus, I've never seen a company not adhere to that. They go out of their way, in some instances, to promote especially to Maryville people. There's only some things they can control, and wages are competitive, particularly today, post-COVID. And the simplest analogy I can give is simply this. Silos, agricultural land, negligible tax dollars, 0 tax dollars on the personal side, and almost next to nothing on the real side. Today, it's generating tax dollars. We're seeing companies take interest, and I'm confident that within a year or two, you'll see companies come in, offering new jobs, working with us to hire local people, paying livable wages, paying personal property dollars that aren't TIF'd, that flow through to the taxpayer, and real estate taxes that didn't exist.
What you're talking about is future gonna happen, not what's happening, what's being paid today. And my point is, I've asked for the information. If the information is critically important, then it should be right there. It should be easily given. Any resident should be able to come and ask for it and see, and we should be able to say, oh, we're giving these tax abatements or deferred tax payments or whatever. This is the value that we're calculating because we're given this. This is what we're receiving in return. We should be able to do that. And we should be able to come together and have a discussion and say, is this worth it? Is this, if someone wanted to offer me a car for $500, I should be able to be like, is that a good deal or not? Residents should be able to come and say, we're offering these things, is it a good deal or not? Because the information is not available, we cannot make informed decisions as residents. We cannot come to forums like this and say, because now we got to ask the questions, like, what is the value? I want to know how much the school system is losing because of this. The school system doesn't even know. That's, if someone's taking $10 from me, I'm going to know that someone's taking $10 from me. If I have to pay $20 to see a movie, I know that I'm paying $20. I don't understand why we are having a trouble getting the information. That's my only point. And for 2 years, I've asked this. Why can't we see what the value is? That's the question. Why can't we see the value?
Again, we see value every place we go. Hard numbers. We have the compliance documents. We're compressing those down. We will have the 22 report that will summarize all the abatements.
The Economic Development Commission is separate from the town of Maryville.
Now,
It's a
the
separate
economic,
entity, correct?
now, the Economic Development Commission is an extension of the town of Maryville. The commission members, there are 5 commission members. 3 of the 5 are council members.
Who provides oversight to the or the Redevelopment Commission?
The council itself, because the Redevelopment Commission is made up, which is similar in many, many communities, by council members themselves.
So the council members, as part of the redevelopment, are responsible for providing a counterbalance, mitigation of a risk. If the town council wanted to overrule the redevelopment commission, how would that happen if 5 people out of 7? Where's the oversight?
Well,
You're asking the town council to be their own oversight.
That's one way to look at it, and where that would happen is at the public meetings. You know, and you're aware of the process. There's a preliminary hearing, and then there's a time period, posting, and then there's a final hearing, a confirmatory resolution. And that period is at least 2 weeks. In some instances, it's 30 days. Many things can occur in that 30-day period where ultimately the decision by the council after the Economic Development Committee and or Economic Development Commission has made a recommendation, they can act. And you see that played out in council meetings.
The thing of it is what I see played out at council meetings is there are things on the agenda for town council that have been approved, but it actually hasn't even been voted on because the planning and the redevelopment committee is immediately beforehand. How do they know to put that on the printed agenda? Because what happens is now the public is being cut out of something that should be, as we learned earlier, the public should be able to be a part of this. Now we end up with the redevelopment committee being 5 town council members just to make their own decisions and move forward.
Well, I respectfully, I don't agree with your comment about the public being cut out. The public has multiple opportunities to participate in any of these processes and ask questions.
There's multiple times that I've been to these meetings and you've actually asked me to leave. So I'm kind of, I misunderstand what you're saying right now. I have tried to get involved. I want to know. I want to know what the numbers are. I want to be able to assess the value. I want to be able to go back in plain talk to my fellow residents and say, this is a good deal. We're doing good. And yet I've been asked to leave. I don't understand.
I don't recall any one meeting, Brian, where you were asked to leave, but we're getting off topic here. After the meeting tomorrow, as we have before, we'll set up aside any amount of time you want. You and I first met when we had a conversation about TIF. And you know, I enjoy those questions, but
Well,
I don't know what else to add here at this point.
My issue is that Mr. Pettit has publicly accused me of not asking questions at our meetings, and I got like 30 or 40 questions, and you guys didn't even get past the first. My first question at the meeting was, when's the sunset? Because some of these TIF zones should have a 20-year limit, and some should have a
Well,
30-year
here,
limit.
that's a good jumping off point to go back to the topic. Bob knows those sunset dates. So I'm gonna ask Bob to comment on that, the sunset dates for the 9 allocation or TIF areas we have.
So the majority of the allocation areas were created at a time that they had a 30-year life. So 30 years from the time they were created, that's when the sunset would occur. Currently, if you create an allocation area and you don't issue debt and you don't pledge TIF to a debt, there's an indefinite life on those. So I don't think we have any of those at this point. But if we went out and created an allocation area, didn't issue debt, it could last forever. There'd be no reason to do that, but that's the way the statute reads. I have, and I could go through every one of them and tell you when they sunset, if you'd like, or I could just show you afterwards.
That would be fine. TIF zones are not supposed to include residences. Is this not correct?
You can have residential properties in an allocation area. However, you do not collect tax increment from those residential homes. Now, the legislature did create a process where we can create a residential TIF. They did that a couple years ago. We haven't done that in Maryville, but it's being done around the state.
That's a HOTIF?
No, it's not a HOTIF. HOTIF's a whole separate thing with a whole lot of different requirements. This is truly just a regular allocation area. People are doing it for major subdivisions in their communities.
The TIF zone money is paid to the RDC, not the town of Maryville?
Well, the clerk treasurer is the treasurer for the redevelopment commission, so the clerk treasurer is responsible for the collection and disbursement of those funds.
On the order of the redevelopment commissioner, the proper authority, these are, whether it's a tax fund, a donation, or it's a tax increment, they are all under the aegis or the supervision of the town of Maryville. Different boards get some authority to pay for them, but it's still under the authority of the town. They belong to the town of Maryville. Now, they may be segregated and say they're the Department of Redevelopment gets to say, the Redevelopment Commission gets to decide to spend them, but they have to follow legal guidelines on what they can spend on. All of that is the primary government of Maryville's money. It is cordoned off from the council in terms of they can't go into it without Redevelopment Commission permission, but the money generated is in the name of the civil government of Maryville through its Department of Redevelopment. It's another tool. It belongs to the town of Maryville.
You're trying to describe a separation that we just learned there is no separation. Maryville Town Council is the redevelopment commission.
But even if it wasn't, that is illegal. The statute requires there to be a redevelopment commission before it can be spent. And if it happens to be the council members, that's done a lot of places, on towns especially, not in cities so much.
So is the school system getting their grant from the redevelopment committee or from the town of Maryville?
The town of Maryville, let me just say this, because this is a big bugaboo of mine. The town of Maryville is a municipal corporation. It delivers its service through departments. That's as old as Frederick Taylor, who was a scientist who just studied organizations and how to deliver things. So technically, the town of Maryville Municipal Corporation delivers its services a variety of ways. Through its police department to keep you safe. The town council is an office, it's a department, but it doesn't do anything directly. It authorizes spending, though, to the appropriation. So in this case, the town of Maryville authorizes expenditures through its Department of Redevelopment. And those funds, under the law, get authorized for permission to spend from the Redevelopment Commission in that particular case. And we're talking about spending that would happen monthly or as frequently as they pay a bill, too, because, you know, councils do that as well. And the same would be true. You don't have a lot of variegated government here. Your Stormwater Management Board of Directors, those people pay their bills, too. They just don't happen to use property taxes presently to pay for their debt or anything. They're using user charges for everything. But that board is in charge of that. And they have the legal authority to review claims and review payment to creditors or to officers or to employees. And so it's all the town of Maryville. It just, because the town of Maryville needs to have departmentalization to divide labor and to be more effective, to create specialization in particular areas of service, and to deliver it to you better. You don't want me delivering police services. I've seen every Law and Order, and so I know Miranda, but I'm not a good cop. But I was a great finance officer. Forgive me, God, I'm not bragging. I hope it's the truth. And I did that, I feel like I did that well, and would have might have been doing it again, except I had this little ambition of mine. So departments become the way in which companies, small organizations, school systems, they all deliver it. And it just, so it really is the town
So now
of
the
Maryville.
redevelopment commission is the department.
It is a department technically under the statute. Whether they behave like one there, a lot of people are informal in towns, but it is a
I
department.
just want to know, is the redevelopment department committee, whoever, are they're giving the school system a grant of $450,000? That's correct, right?
We were just
So,
told.
so there's no separation, that's the town of Maryville. Redevelopment, there's no separation, it's the town of Maryville.
Right, because the
Okay.
town council itself wouldn't have the power to spend redevelopment money from their funds, but it happens to be 5 of the 7 members, which some people in some communities like having elected officials with the power that redevelopment commissions have, as opposed to appointed officials, even though the law contemplates an appointee, so the council technically, the council president has to appoint 3 of the council members, and the legislative body has to appoint 2, so it's legally constituted. The terms are only a year, but you still are bringing that kind of judgment. For a very brief time, I served with 4 members of my 5-member town council, and I was on it too. And I couldn't vote on the claims because I'm legally by law the treasurer, and we thought there was a conflict if I'm preparing the claim that we're going to vote on. It didn't stop me from voting on anything else, but it voted on that.
So the $450,000 the town of Maryville's given is that more or less than what the school system would have gotten if these businesses did not get tax abatements or were not sitting in a TIF zone paying to the redevelopment
This I
commission?
can say without any fear of any correct or right correction. People can contradict me, but there is no empirical or understandable basis to contradict this. Before 2019, the schools could argue that allocation areas affected them. Since 2019, there is no impact directly to them, so they're not losing anything. And nobody ever loses money in an allocation, in a tax abatement. It's the most worst named asset or tool of economic development I've ever seen, because it sounds like it's doing something it doesn't do at all. It really does. Nobody loses any revenue.
So if the
It's
police,
I hate
if
to
the
say
police
this, it's
department
incidence of
needed-
taxation
If
changes.
the police department needed $100 today, and the business that would have paid a tax, $100, is now deferred and they only pay $5, that's,
Honestly, that's
No
not-
one loses?
Remember I said how that output worked?
yes.
It's incidence of taxation. I'm going to show you with a slide I prepared.
Okay.
Over the last, since 2019 till now, some of your taxes felt like they went up.
Yes.
It's an incidence of taxation problem because as a percentage relative to how you started in 2019, as a percentage of the total property tax base residents that you own, relative to now, you grew by, it's actually 400%. It sounds like a 10% increase because you went from like 26 to 36%, but that's a percent-wise much greater than that sounds. And so it's an incidence of taxation issue, meaning it's a shift. So it happens in all tax bases. If residential, after general reassessment, is always used to in the old system, pick up more of the tax base than commercial and other assets in the tax base. And over time, the way we fixed that is the state would pay a property tax relief credit, so the impact on local governments wasn't as great, mostly taxpayers that own their home. We gave that up. So it's an instance of taxation. Because of caps and how levies are set, Maryville only gets to raise so much a year. It's going to raise it anyway, assuming everybody's in a position to pay their taxes. So the issue is shifting to one tax base or another. I know that 20 years ago, the U.S. Steel Corporation picked up a greater percentage of taxes in the town that it lives in than it does now, because there was a way in which you would lower the assessments on houses, raise them on there, and so they would represent a big share. Another way to think about it is, if all residentials represented 30% of the tax base, and suddenly they become 50% of the tax base, and the tax base has been growing, you will take up, even with the controls on how frequently we can grow, there'll be no loss of money. It's just going to shift more for you to pay. And that's really what happens, not that exaggerated a method, that's really what happens in tax abatement. I'll be happy to stay a little while afterwards and show you in a spreadsheet I have how that really happens. But
So if Amazon and/or Domino's say close their doors next year, do they have to pay the tax abatement back?
It could be, depending on what made them close. There's still protections to the locality. First, there could be a clawback if they overdid their business. But let's pretend none of those things are in place. Suddenly, the abatement still stays with the property. There won't be anybody showing up, though, to say that they're continuing in compliance, and it gets lost. Then the town will go after that. But let's take there's no abatement. If a business closes, they have so much time to go and get themselves into obsolescence and get themselves lowered. And if they closed because of a disaster, there's a provision in the property tax law that's been there for a while, they can be taken off the tax base. If it's done in time for the town or city to react to it, I know this because we had a flood in my community in 1990, all of those houses were taken off the tax base. Luckily, they had the rate high enough so that when they adopted a rate high enough that when they came off the AV, they were able to run government. But let's say they adopted a low rate relative to the, remember I told you it's a fraction, spending divided by tax base, and I take all this tax base away. If I pretend that I have a low tax base to begin with, I'll have a rate high enough. But if I adopted a rate low because I made the tax base close to what I thought it was going to be and there's a disaster, then I lose that. And the same is true for anybody that goes out of business, whether they have an abatement or not. The abatement is just a delay on new property value, not the existing property value, which gets reassessed generally. If it's commercial, it doesn't get reassessed every year. Residents, they try to do a neighborhood thing, but it does get reassessed for its proper value. So we're never losing from them that are there. And the tax liability continues with the property. An owner is supposed to pay whether they're getting income from it or not, but they'll go and they'll try to appeal that because it's not generating income for them anymore. But so you're asking me to tell you a lot about the property tax base that's more complicated, as the president said at the outset. The abatement doesn't lose anything because of clawback, even if somebody goes out of business.
My point is, we are trying to think of TIF zones and tax abatements and whatnot as no risk and no loss. But there is risk, and my concern is how do we mitigate the risk? Because if you're getting a bond, which is a loan, and you're depending on this money, and then if Amazon leaves, there are many studies where Walmart has built a warehouse in a community and then got a tax abatement, and then under 10 years later, they close the warehouse, they pull out, and that community has already spent money like, oh, wow, Walmart will never leave, and then they leave.
Yeah.
My point is how and where do we mitigate risk against these future calamities?
I want to just add something. I don't know if anybody characterized everything as no risk. Public finance has an element of risk. It generally is low when you're doing a general GO bond.
Yeah.
Tax abatements actually are low risk, but not no risk. And allocation area financing, depending on if you're going to do debt or not, if you're going to do debt, it is a little higher risk, but not as much as it once was. Firstly, markets respond to it differently now because they understand it better. And you have people like the people up in this panel that take steps to try to make the debt to be as inexpensive as possible, because interest rate is the cost of capital, and it's based on the discount of risk. So they're doing a lot of things to make it unlikely. And I think they probably pick out the kind of things they want to finance. I'll bet you they don't, although I will say that Valparaiso did that whole area where they had a big Walmart, and it worked for them. They were able to put in sewers. Some places it's a mistake. I got to believe that you can come to meetings and make sure that they're doing prudent judgment about the kind of things that they want to finance in terms of improvements. But you're right. And if anybody represented to you that it was no risk, that would not be true. Finance is a risk all the time, or there wouldn't be an interest rate. If I could borrow from you and it was no risk, you should charge me nothing except the time value of the money. And we're not going to do that when we ask to borrow money to use it for a public purpose.
understand that.
They got to do. So the discount of risk is a lot better with allocation area financing than it used to be because Indiana's was so new and nobody understood it. But it is a little riskier than GO. Everything is. But there is really very low risk to no risk with abatements. The risk of them abandoning is an issue, but we could have anybody go business up because the council doesn't have economic development capacity or staff to go and look at the business plans of every operation that's out there. Tepe suddenly did give us a new town hall here, but it was a going operation. I bought stuff from it all the time, and when it closed, suddenly, who knew?
I remember
I was
shopping at
bummed out.
Tepe's.
I wanted to get my G.I. Joe with Bardair there, and I couldn't.
I remember Tepe's, I was there.
But thank you for your patience with the questions, sir.
We'll come back to you, Brian.
I was just wondering where I could get my continuing education credits for attending this work. No, it's wonderful information. And as nerdy as it sounds, we could probably sit here and talk about this. I find it extremely interesting. What I'm wondering is, towns and cities are different. And what is it that all of you do with, what is something that is the number one myth that you could bust for somebody in regards to what you do with taxes and how taxes impact what you do for the town? And was that a no, I'm not getting those continuing education credits?
If it were up to me, I'd give you a certificate right now, but you want it to be worth something, you do need to talk to the superintendent of your school system.
Well, I think the biggest myth that I deal with is on TIF areas, allocation areas, and if other units of government are losing money and how much money are they losing. And I'm not sure I could say any better than what Michael just did for the last 15 minutes. That we deal with that everywhere, whether it's a city, a county, a town. That's always the question that comes up. And we try to educate as we're in redevelopment commission meetings or town council meetings. I think the state tries to do that with all the reporting that we need to do on an annual basis to provide that information to folks like you so you understand it, and you may not agree with it, but at least we lay it out so you can see what we're trying to do.
I don't know if it's a number one myth, but one thing I think to address, and it's been touched on briefly, but important to note again, from year to year, as people look at their tax bill, it can't simply be an evaluation of if the digits in the tax rate went up or down because of the relationship to the assessed value. And so the overall tax rate itself may reduce, but the amount of tax dollars that they pay may go up, but it's because the assessed value went up, not because the town council wanted to raise taxes. It's a little bit unusual to think about maybe sometimes that way, but it's important to understand that just because the dollars paid went up does not mean the town council increased the tax rate. It's because the assessed value went higher, which is great, because then when you sell your home, you'll receive more than you would have. And so it's important to know that difference.
Another myth, is certainly specific to Maryville, is that if we became became a city, we'd suddenly have all this extra cash. Not necessarily the case, because unlike Crown Point, Hammond, East Chicago, Gary, they have a water department, a municipal water department. They have a sanitary storm department in-house, which allows them greater taxing authority. They can then generate more dollars. And we don't have that. We have strategic partners in MCD and in Maryville Stormwater, So that's not necessarily a panacea for us if that were to occur. Anyone else? Sure.
For the schools, it's very similar to what Mrs. Hudson said. It's the inverse relationship between your AV and your tax rate. And so sometimes we'll get folks that call us up and say, why'd you raise our taxes, when we may not have done anything, but the value of the house went up, and then that's caused an increase. And so we try to take our time to explain that, to try to help people understand that. And if you're not selling your house, but your AV went up, it isn't anything to you right then. It's when you sell your house is when you see that benefit. And so that's the biggest struggle that I've seen as a superintendent, is helping people understand when that occurs, when nothing else has changed, but that it can give a mixed message, and then helping people understand that.
All right, so just on that subject right there, one of the things that I believe and I know can happen, if the town is very efficient, the school system is very efficient with the money that they get, although an assessed valuation goes up, doesn't mean that the taxes have to go up, because the town can lower its tax rate, and that's something we haven't done. So I believe that's something we should actually be striving for, because actually a lot of times when people talk about the assessed valuation, it has to do with inflation, them just printing money and the value of our dollar going down. It's not that the value of our houses are going up, the prices are going up, and the prices are just reflecting the fact that they just printed all of this money with the banking system, the Federal Reserve, and everything else. So I think we can do the community a service if we can figure out how we can sort of offset the cost of living increase they have by not just following the assessed value and allowing our taxes to creep up constantly, because it makes it harder for people, some people, particularly elderly people, to keep their houses because their incomes is not keeping up with inflation, but here they are getting hit with a higher tax bill. And I know they're property tax caps, but I just wanted to make that one point because you're all addressing that. And then
May I respond real quick, or?
Sure, please.
I just want to tell you that I guarantee, as the main budget advisor to the town council, that they look at that every single year. They try to keep taxes as low as they can, are proud of the fact that Maryville's tax rate is
I'm not
low
refuting
in
that.
Lake County.
Yeah, I'm not repeating that.
And the reason, unfortunately, that some of the flat budget number has to increase each year is because expenses go up. As you know, expenses go up for you as a family, you know, in your private life. They do for the town too. So when gas increases, it does for the town. We can't ask the police department to drive less because gas went up, because then that reduces public safety. And so it's difficult, but I guarantee to you that they consider that every year and keep the budget as low as they can to try to affect that tax rate.
Sure, right. So it's not impossible. All I'm saying is it's possible. It's something that we should continue to strive for. So just because the assessed valuation went up $100 million doesn't mean that we need to go up equally. So, and then the other question that I actually have, because I could not get this answer, and I've asked Lake County, ever since we've implemented the local area income tax, which Maryville didn't have anything to do, I want to know how much of the local area income tax does a town actually get? So we've got 36,000 residents, and we've got people that are working in the businesses around here. How much of the local area income tax does Maryville actually get? No, I'm in terms of percentage.
It's a fair question, if you'll allow. That income tax is 1.5%, correct?
1%.
And the 1% is allocated based on an algorithm that was just given to Lake County that I think it complicates this conversation. So let's take that 1% first. That's supposed to be for property tax relief. Now, we didn't do anything up here about tax caps. I could have shown that here. But the county, because it's the overlapping government, has the most significant loss because of property tax caps and collections. And that's a complication for them because they're responsible for courts and jails in addition to other parts of public safety. And that's expensive. And there's other things they do too that might be excessive. Having
We can
said
let the
that,
prisoners out.
they now get most of that money. So that if you looked at the last 4 years of the general fund and you look at the property tax side, the property tax replacement money, because it's from income tax, they collect more than if they got 100% of the tax levy. That's a fact. Some of that's because they don't have the ability to do a perfect estimate because it is kind of a difficult number. We don't collect data the way we need to get that done, but it is factual. They get more that way, so they're living large. My community, this community, every community, the urban center especially, and the town of Munster remarkably, all lose a lot of money because of tax caps. And we don't make the income tax be based on where it's generated. We treat it as a county as a whole, and then it gets allocated based on the gross levies minus certain things. So that goes to tax levies after it first does what it's done for the county. Now, I would suggest this. This is one of my things I would want them to do. They should get an operating balance that they could establish, just like we did and a lot of places do. Get their general fund up to that balance, and then every other year, change the algorithm so they release more of the taxes for tax relief for everyone else.
Right.
I think they need to be made aware of that. Now I'm going to go back to this.
Sure.
The way in which we get those there, we're told every year. I showed you some of what you get there in terms of the property tax. They have to have two separate funds by law. One is the public safety local income tax, and the other one is the CEDIT, or the economic development income tax. They have to give an estimate when they do the budget. That estimate comes from the DLGF, but it's really from the tax analysis group out of the LSA in the General Assembly. That money then gets distributed basically like a guarantee because we collect an arrearage a little bit. They still take a look at what they've already collected before they give us the estimate, which to me is not an estimate, that's a report of what we intend to give you because they've got it already. And then that's what we get. You can see what's being used for that, but the allocation is based on, for the public safety side to favor cities, it includes the levies that we put down for general government minus special taxing districts, which would take out the stormwater if it had a levy for Maryville. Then for economic development, it's all the levies plus the special taxing districts, and the county has been allowed to have its allocation of that money based on what their levy would have been if they still had the hospital care for the indigent levy down from a rate that we fought many years ago and got rid of. So they get our health department. So they don't even have the health department doing as much as it did there under that HCI, but they still get to include that to get their ratio. So it's essentially, you said you're a CPA, you get fractions. That's all this is. They take the total amount that's going to be collected, they take the levies first for the public safety side, and they allocate it based on that. There is no population-based distribution. The economic development could be based on that, which would favor some of the urban core, but the county, when it adopted, went for this other one, which is the base law that says you do that based on the levies minus the CUME funds and the special service districts.
Right.
So everybody's treated. So special service districts are more prevalent in the bigger cities, so they got more of the public safety money, the belief being that they have a bigger need because they're urban. But that's how the allocation comes. So really, none of the 19 cities and towns in Lake County get any kind of say over that at all. They just accept it. They're told, it's reported to them during the summer of budget preparation, how much they're going to get. They are monitored through auditing whenever it happens, and the council and the clerk treasurer who watch in real time along with the town manager about what they can spend it on, because there's legal strictures about what that can be spent on. But that's how it comes.
Sure.
I know that I was in 2 communities that still are trying to figure out what to do with it all, because they always wanted to complain about how much little money they had, and they suddenly got all this money, and they weren't prepared to plan for it.
Right.
That's
So-
not true here, and that's not true where I previously served.
So my concern is that as a town, we have all of these tax inducements for these large corporations that are bringing in employers in, and yes, we may have people that are from Maryville that are working in this place, but is Maryville getting its fair share of that local area income tax? And you just answered that question, no.
The formula's set by
yeah.
the state, sir, and so it's just
I
not
understand
clear
that.
about what's fair. I don't know what's fair. I mean, we have to define a common vocabulary. Should it be where the income tax is generated by the income taxpayers in a given corporation? That should be where it stays. The legislature, since we've had these taxes when they first started, has never believed that that's who it belonged to. It was given permission by the legislature, and the county is the imposer, not a local government. The closest you could come to that maybe would be to do population, but you'd be surprised at the shifts. Maryville would do very well, but Gary would do better than some people think, and Hamlin would do better, and I wouldn't. I've been in the last 3 cycles of the census. I'm lucky that we stay the same.
Yeah, and that's my whole point. It would benefit places like Maryville, it would benefit places like Gary, where we've got large employment bases, but we're not getting our fair share
Fair
of the
enough.
local
In fact,
area
I would go
income
further and
tax.
say, I don't think there's a person in this room doesn't think that Maryville should get more. And you're right, but you're telling the wrong people. We'll hear you, and we'll say, preach it, and I'll turn the pages for you
I
as
was
you do your
just- I was
sermon.
just curious about
But you
what
need
the
to
rate
tell the
was.
legislature about it,
Right.
and that one idea I had, you could tell the county council about.
Right, I was just curious about the rate. I knew it was low. I just couldn't get an exact number.
But the
And that
rate,
was-
it doesn't
right.
tie the redistribution based on where it was raised, and it doesn't tie it based on population, which is an option for only one of those two taxes.
Okay, all right, and then my final objection, it's not an objection, because those were questions. But in regards to the tax abatements, I understood your explanation of the tax abatements is actually right. One of my main objections to the tax abatements is that it just doesn't treat people equally. It doesn't treat businesses equally. And I think one of the roles of the government is to treat people equally. So if somebody has $1 million or $1 billion, they should still be able to get the same just treatment from the government. And I think we sort of subvert the role of the government when we're giving people favors because they've got more money and they can ask for a bigger deal because they're doing a bigger project.
Yeah, that's a social equity problem that's bigger than, we don't do monetary policy in local government, because you mentioned that earlier, we just don't do that here, we're just not that big. And secondly, we don't do social policy. We try our very best to be equitable people and celebrate all the people and treat everybody in government with equal dignity. Some of us are better at it than others, but we're always striving. But I take your point. I will say that in the economic development realm, the law is designed to make people have to ask. There's an old scripture in my faith tradition. I'm not saying you have the same one, but it's in the letter to James in my faith tradition. And one of the great lines from there is, you do not have because you do not ask. Every one of those people, because they're well-heeled, knows they want to ask, and they come to these guys and say, we'd like to get this. They go to those guys, we'd like to get it. And there's some smaller businesses that may not know they could be eligible and don't ask. That's a fair deal. That's a fair thing to point out, but I don't think the inequity is because of any policy choices that are made by this board. And I don't have to defend them. Many of them are my friends, and I like them. But I can run fast out here, take my asthma medicine, I'll be fine, and I can drive home, and they won't get me. So I'm just telling you the truth. I have an incentive to, I want to go to heaven when I'm done, so I'm going to tell the truth.
Right.
I'm confident they're trying to optimize that tool for the benefit of all the residents, but you're pointing out things that are really sourced with larger social issues about equity that I think are very well raised, but may not be within the purview of their tools, even though I think their hearts are all in the right place for that.
Right, well, we need to limit the abatements and no more than 3, but I'll work on it once I get in office.
Couple of questions. Come on up. Let's just form a queue then, okay, since you all have questions. Michael, one thing we didn't touch on is, Maryville, only Winfield is a newer town than Maryville
That
in
is
Lake
correct.
County. We just celebrated our 50th birthday a couple years ago.
Congratulations. You look good for 50.
Well, thank you. I feel good. But my point is, when Maryville first started, it was a very conservative town council.
Yes, it was.
We only had a public works department. We had a police department with our initial 13 officers. Remember that, Lori? No, you don't remember that. Well, I don't remember. Okay. And we had limited public works services. So the town, because of the frozen tax levy, which took effect, I think, in the very next year.
That's correct. You guys got, if you made cuts or you didn't grow it big enough, you were stuck
Right.
with that
So we
basically the
started
rest of the life.
conservative, low budget. So unlike neighboring cities, Crown Point, Hammond, East Chicago,
Munster.
Gary, et cetera, they've been around for 100 years or more.
Right.
God bless them. But they started out with a larger tax base. So when the frozen tax levy hit, it wasn't as large of a hit as it is for the town. And I wanted to know if you could explain that a little bit better so we get a better understanding, because we have smaller cities in Lake County that have more police officers.
Yes.
And we keep telling our police chief, sorry, you're budgeted for 61, because we don't have the funds to hire more. So,
By the way, the police chief, the current one I didn't get a chance to meet, but my former police chief always wanted more police. Let's see if I can find this here. I'm trying to get this so I can show this on this slide. I'm just not getting it to go there. Can you see what's up there now? So what the council president is talking about is this levy here. Does everybody see that? That levy might have gotten cut for all they were going to do here, and then in 1972 for 73, thank you, I'm so sorry, thank you. You're good at this, I so appreciate it. That got frozen, so they couldn't grow that anymore. They could only get more money based on growth, which may or may not happen. And that became the basis. So remember I told you how we do the maximum levy, which is what this is controlling right here, this maximum levy here, has to, those two, that levy and that levy can't exceed your other maximum levy, which was at 7.8.2 something, and that's the sum of that. That got frozen. Instead of letting that levy grow, they had to, you could let the rate float. If you got a lot of growth, you'd be bigger. If you didn't, you didn't. And that becomes the basis for everything. So when a town first incorporates, this was true for Maryville under its law, you better make a case when you first go down, first with the commissioners, and then you go down to, then it was the State Board of Tax Commissioners. You tell them, this is how much we believe legitimately that we need, which will be a reasonable rate for the taxpayers to pay. If you didn't make that number big enough, your locked-in base would only grow by whatever the growth quotient would be. And from 73, they did it basically a locked rate, which is the frozen levy. Then they locked the rate and allowed the levy to grow. Then they said you could go up to 5% every year, and you could go over that if you had more than 5% growth. And then finally, we got what we're currently under, this levy, those controlled levies, the sum of them cannot exceed from the prior year whatever the growth quotient was for the non-farm personal income for the last 6 years, and it can't exceed 6%. I remember one year we decided to not grow something, and we got locked in because for a year and a half, local governments in counties that didn't have income taxes couldn't grow their levies either. And that's when I first got nervous as the fiscal officer. I advised people that we would still give raises, we would still pay for certain things, but we were starting about let's be closed on a certain day. And let's see if we can turn off street lights in certain places. Now, we never ended up having to do that, but it was a real crush for us because that's really the revenue for all the kinds of things we've been talking about people want. And all the other funds get very specific about purposes. The general fund's for all the stuff. And as you saw earlier, I showed you in the budget, the police department is there. And the fire department, when it was there, was competing with the police department, which doesn't seem sensible. You got a bigger tax base and you were able to have a better funded fire department. And you were able to let more of that levy be available then to the police department, if that helps. That's what the frozen levy was. Now, the levies get to grow each year based on that rolling quotient. And one thing that they'll get to do, it's someday when they're done with all the stuff they want to do with TIFs, all that captured AV will suddenly come on. And they'll have this big growth. And it'll allow them then to get a 3-year average that will be enough to allow them to grow their maximum levy a little bit bigger. By then, there'll be tons of places in here and all kinds of things. And I'm going to tell you something Maryville does right. You decided they have room to grow, but they're pretty big already. They're really enormous. They're essentially Ross Township with a little sliver that they're not, right? No. And they have skyscrapers, which they could permit. You have a zoning code that allows that. In the history of developing municipalities as they grow over time, from the time we started them, island communities, they grow all the way out first because everybody wants to be a single or 2-story or not over 3 stories. They grow out first, then they have to grow up because they got to make tax space somewhere to put all the people that come here. They've already started that. My community won't go over 3 stories. So one of our tax base problems is we're not willing to get the tax base available to us in the air if we would allow it. And if you've ever been to Springfield, a capital of a great state, much bigger than us, they don't have anything over 3 stories except the state capitol. I can't believe it's a capital city. Heavens, Indianapolis has beautiful large skyscrapers. And that might make you feel like you're not a town, but there's parts of this that have the quaintness of suburban town living. But you want the tax base like those big things in the sky to help pay for all the other things you need every day, and they don't need so much. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Everybody get that? So that's a comment that I would make. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but there it is. It's my commercial for that.
First of all, I want to thank you guys for putting this on because it's very informative to me. Second is just a comment for Trista. I appreciate what you're saying about the assessments, and I, in a way, agree. Yes, the city has to pay more. The bills are higher as gas goes up. But keep in mind, so does everything else. So taxes increase, rents or whatever, mortgages, and the insurers follow suit. And I just drove here, and the gas station at Madison, where the land is for sale right there, is $4.19 tonight.
Wow.
I don't think I've seen a $4 anything lately. So things are going out of control, so people get nervous, and people will be very anxious about everything. The inflation is really a little bit too much for us. But I have 2 questions. One of them is, we know that Gary is getting the right to over their own schools again. And my hunch is that Gary will probably start opening some schools again. How will that affect the Maryville school system?
I'm sorry, how will that?
How will that affect the Maryville school system?
I don't know, really. I'm not. You got me? There we go. I'm not quite sure how that is going to impact us. We are not like an open border school. You have to be in Ross Township to come to our school.
Are Gary kids coming to Maryville?
We don't accept what we call transfers from outside. Now, am I naive to think somebody's not sneaking in somehow? I think there probably are, but schools can make a decision to be open or not in that regard. We keep it to, we don't accept a transfer if somebody wants to come from Crown Point or Gary and they, because they want to come to ours and they're living there, you have to live here. So I don't know that that's going to have a significant impact in our enrollment and what we're doing.
Yeah, I heard so much about Gary kids going to Maryville schools that I'm kind of surprised by that.
Yeah.
Thank you. My second one is, so when we're looking at the budgets that we looked at, and the budget looks really favorable. Every time I talk to somebody, everybody keeps telling me Maryville is incredibly tight on money. Maryville doesn't have money, but yet we see a surplus. Does this budget include the ARP funds?
No,
in
I
any
didn't
way?
represent that. But that's only for very specific purposes, and I didn't show you that. It's a one-time inflow. It's not recurrent. We're always looking for regular recurrent money, and it's not. And I don't know, they could tell you better what they intend to do with it. And it would be in a designated fund and separate as well.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing really quick, Smee, if I can respond, about the surplus that you saw. As you heard about the property taxes coming into the town just twice a year, June and December, if we don't carry some kind of cash balance in, let's say, the general fund, May, and be able to pay the bills in May until we get the new taxes in June, we'd be in obviously a world of hurt, in a bad struggle. So yes, you see a balance. It depends on what time of year you see the balance. If you see the balance in the cash of the fund in January, right after receiving a December tax draw, it's much higher than it would be in May. But we need that in January so that May is still positive and we don't go into a negative. So we do keep a close watch on what that percentage is in relation to the bills that are needed, so that it doesn't go higher than what is reasonable, knowing full well that we're holding the taxpayers' money. So they do keep that in check, but there is a reason that it needs to be there, again, depending on when in the year you're seeing it.
Once again, I'm going to thank everybody for putting this on tonight. This has been very informative to us. One of the things I want to discuss kind of piggybacks off of what Councilman Bella said. Maryville, when it was created, I don't think that they ever imagined it would get as big as it has. We've had a incredibly huge positive growth in Maryville. We've grown from an infrastructure standpoint to a population standpoint, but it seems like we never caught up financially. So with that being said, I know that 1973 issue, the cap, has kind of been the pesky catalyst in all this
Yeah,
that
your
has
first
presented
base,
us.
right.
So, from somebody from a department head, what can we do to try and get more money per se? I know that's like everybody wants more money, right? But just to be in a comparison, Maryville's 33 square miles. We have 36,000 people according to the 2020 census, but there was only about, I want to say like in the 70 percentile range, 72 percentile range of people that actually replied. So we're probably closer to 42,000. From like 6:45 or 6:30 a.m. till 8 p.m., you have 100,000 people with feet on the ground here in Maryville because of the restaurants, because of the businesses, stores, jobs, etc. So we see our neighbors, East Chicago is one of them, I'm not picking on them, but they have a significantly higher budget than we do. They have a lot more money coming in. And I know part of it is like longevity. We never grew financially.
Right, and where they're everybody was in a different place when the legislature froze those levies back in 73, 74. So there's never been a way for the legislature to get you out of under that. They basically, so if you started low, you could only grow based on whatever the quotient was over time, which wasn't always a quotient, and that's the hard rub. So they are trying to think about some of those things. They're helping with the old pension, but not the new. And they're helping with the income tax for public safety, which could be for operational purposes or capital purposes. But I'm going to say this, and the others really need to answer this, and the council would ask this. If you were asking me as the public finance officer in this master community of utopia, I would say to you, Chief, tell me what you need that you don't have now, and give me a rough idea of how to pay for what you think it'll cost, and I'll see if we can do it now. If you're asking for more recurrent money because you want to grow either salaries or the staffing, that's a different kind of problem. There are some ways that, I used to joke about this. I said, we're going to have all the tools we need to build new police stations and buy police cars, but nothing to pay the police to drive them or work in them. That's still a complication. And I'm hoping some of this will get fixed. They've called this fiscal task force that they created. One of the senators basically is selling it, that was in the General Assembly, is this will be the way to get rid of the income tax, which is, some people think that their purpose is the fiscal policy of the state needs to have no income tax. And that may or may not be true. Nobody likes paying taxes, by the way. I don't either. But they're necessary. And they have a diverse revenue stream, and the income tax can be more sustainable than sales tax and other things that they collect. So you want to have that diversity. I do think you could mess with that a little bit. But one of the things they're also going to look at is the comprehensive way that all government is paid for. That would be a good time that you and your colleagues formulate an idea about what you want to tell that commission, when I know it's going to take public hearing and public input, and say what your needs really are that can't be met under the current regime. And sometimes you have to remind them, you've given me a lot of things I can do to build the station and buy the car, but you haven't given me enough that I can have. When we hire a new police officer anywhere in this state, they should be, as long as they perform, and we want them to come home from every shift, so we want them to wear their vest, they should have a career. And they should have a career that's satisfying to them and safe and good for the community. That means we got to plan for how do I pay for that officer for 25 years or more. So I share your frustration, and we can't print money. Someday I'd love to be Secretary of the Treasury, and then I will, but not now. So the goal would be to find ways, and I do think Senator Travis Holden, who's one of the co-chairs there, he's very smart. He's talked like he's going to get rid of the income tax, but he's much more prudent than that. He does have a sympathy for local government. They all think we were sitting on surpluses, which are not true, because we do have policies to put them in place because we don't get cash every day. We have to be able to pay for the bills that happen while we're waiting for the most significant form of our money. And as you can see, your most significant form of money in the general fund is the property tax. So I do think that that would be a good resource. Does anybody else think there's a better idea than that?
So I've fallen into many deep rabbit holes trying to research this, Google holes, whatever you want to call them, right? The average out of like 13,000 and some change police departments throughout the country is for a city or town that's between 10,000 to 50,000 people is 2.4 officers per 1,000 people, okay? We're roughly at about 1.6. We're not keeping up.
If that's the metric. I will say, I've heard a lot of other metrics that are either more or less than that, but I take your point.
There's no
I take a look
standard.
at your policies that say how many people can be off, whatever rotations you do. How many people do you want to staff 7 days a week based on the shifts that you have, and then allow for those vacations? Because, you know, if I just had 4 people and enough of them had enough vacation time, I wouldn't have 4 people for 2,080 hours a year. I would have to allow for the time that they're going to be gone. So then I start talking about half full-time people all the way up to more. That's a lot to do on you, because if you built, the department's older than that and it came with you. But those are the kind of things I would look at. I do think those are fair metrics. And I also worry about burnout for people in your work. I think you do our hardest work. I never like to see you with your lights on behind me, but nevertheless, I'm glad you have your lights when you're going to get someone else and making us all safe. You do very difficult work, and we ask you to be cheerful and have the perfect kind of judgment and have to be a social worker on the spot. We ask a lot of you, and we don't compensate really as well as we could. I wish we could pay you way better. Under the current constraints to do that, we'd have to share tax base, and that gets more complicated because you're a Maryville police officer, and you're proud of that, and so are my officers, and so are the Munster officers. But they share all the time in other ways. There needs to be a way for us to share some of that, like patrol should be local. If I was thinking this out loud, I'm thinking out loud, by the way, this is really radical thinking. Patrol should be unit specific, but let's say investigations could be spread over more of an area. And if we made the departments big enough, there could be a real career. Like
how would you
could
do
be
that
not
with-
just chief of a department this size, you could be a captain of a division or a bureau, and then we get chiefs of something really big because we're spreading the costs. Yeah, I just wish we could. I think there's laws that let us do that now, but getting everybody to share is hard. I'm a soul child. I say soul because only child doesn't sound as hip. And I learned how to share better than some of these people with big families, and I'm ready to share a lot in government, but it is harder because, as James Carville once said, I'm giving him credit, politics is Hollywood for ugly people. So politics, you get elected and your name's on a sign and they treat you good at the Dairy Queen, which I am very tempted to get first in line, but I don't. And they treat me good at the bank when I'm banking. And the thing is, we got to be humble about that and be more about equipping the people who have careers here who deliver our most fundamental services like that. And I consider the argument we're having now is whether or not schools are a toll good or a pure public good. From the early 20th century till the last 25 years, we believe that they were a pure public good. Now we're treating them like toll goods. Like people say, well, why should I pay for it if I don't have kids in a school? Well, you should pay because you want those people to grow up and be productive because it's good for the society. And there's a user fee for being in a school. It's called Market Day. That was a joke for the superintendent. I thought he would get a kick out of that. My point is that we're having that argument. We're just not using those words. But there's never been an argument about public safety. It's just been tough to get the legislature when a lot of them think we got to lower taxes, and then they expect us to do more because they don't understand that property taxes are like a perfect tool to pay for public safety because downturn or upturn, you can have a regular sustained revenue source to pay your people well and be available for us.
I mean, and truth be told, that a department like ours, our budget should be close to what this whole town's budget is, what the general fund budget is, honestly. The fact that we make things happen, I give credit to Lori because we were very creative, especially her. She's the backbone of us financially. She figures everything out.
Very good.
So with that being said, I mean, to say we're on a shoestring budget is kind of giving us credit. You know, it's just very, we're trying our best. We're trying to, like right now, we've even cut down our detective bureau because we're focusing more on patrol. So again, what do? Because patrol should be 60 to 65% of your department should be patrol.
Oh, that's interesting you feel that way. That's interesting.
That's a standard set. That's actually by many people that 60 to 65% of your department should be in patrol, and it's still not enough. So again, there's many different ones. One of the things, another thing that I wanted, public safety user fee. It's something that has been tossed around. We have looked at
Who would pay that?
So just to give you an idea, our hotels, we have approximately 24, 25 hotels in Maryville right now. You have a heavy influx of people coming in. At any given time, you probably, well, pre-2020, 2019-ish, you had approximately 2,200 people extra living in Maryville or staying in Maryville or whatever you want to call it. Our call volume, over 20, depending on what year it's been, but anywhere from 22 to 2,500 calls for service at our hotels. So you have people that are consuming our resources that aren't even putting in they're not paying any taxes to us. So the idea would be if a public safety user fee.
But the hotel is.
The hotel wouldn't be paying the taxes either. It would be anybody that would be checking in. It would be a simple $6 or an $8 fee every time everybody comes in and checks in. It's a public safety user fee.
So it's really a tax.
Kind of.
Because it'd be a
But I'd like
user
to
fee
keep
if
it
they
home
called
rule.
you. It'd be a user fee if they called you. Look, there's user fees on, as you know, in tickets for courts. A bunch of those fees are court fees because we think if you're going to use the court system, you can give part of the money back by paying the fees for that. My only problem is that you're a pure public good. You deliver a pure public good, and a user fee makes you a toll good or a market good. I don't want you to be a market good either, which is what they're trying to do to schools. But I agree with you. We don't really have a lot of choices. So I will tell you places I've been. We have fees for to allow to charge if you want to get an employment in the police department. You have a lot of costs to just check somebody out. Just like in college, you have to pay to have an application and have a user sliding scale if they don't have the money. We make them pay to have an application. They should pay for the cost of all that process. I know you have a philosophical deal, but I'm telling you,
It's not a philosophical deal, it's just there happening. You can't get people to apply right now, period. And you put a fee on it, they're going to say, see ya, buddy.
No, I take your point. We're in a different environment now, but
Yeah.
at one point it was, okay? You should be doing more with fingerprints. Not when we throw that in when we arrest you. That's part of the service.
Sure.
But we would but for parents and for school employees and other employees, you guys have all these competencies. You should charge more for your insurance forms. Sorry, residents, but they should, because you know what you get? The insurance companies basically say, I don't have to send anybody out. You've got this, how many in your department?
61.
61 fully trained people that can look at an accident, and they've got all the skill sets. I don't have to do a thing, and I'll just, pay you the bigger money that they're going to charge you for the accident report. So most places it would cost like 10 cents to get a copy. That's why we charge 25 bucks or more, because you're getting the benefit, insurer company, of our talent. So we're basically taking your supposed excess capacity and selling it. There's other ways you could be imaginative about that. I once thought of how many times do you have to, as part of a divorce settlement, have a police officer there when the parents meet to change the children? That ought to be a charge. Now, people hear that and go, what are we paying taxes for? You're paying taxes so that you're equipped, ready, fully trained, and you got a force ready to go. But that doesn't mean we don't have incident costs. And we were pretty successful in some of the places I've served to get a hazmat fee, but also an incident fee. When then Senator Obama came to Wicker Park, we had a lot of extra police detail. That's a perfect time to have a public safety user charge. I love
So
it.
just to give you an idea of some of the things that we've gotten done right now and passed, so we can kind of cut back on some of our call volume, we've implemented online reporting.
Ooh, that's nice.
There are going to be calls that we're going to eliminate that we're no longer going to respond to, and they're going to have to be done solely on online reporting. Something that you just mentioned, that would be a perfect example.
Yeah.
The custody issues,
Yeah.
he didn't bring this, my child was supposed to be here at 3 and he came
Right.
at 3:30. We're not secretaries. You can do that online, right? But these are things that we have done. We have looked every which way in every which direction. And one of the things, and this is the last thing I promise, I'll stop talking so we can all get back home, but Winfield seemed to be in a bit of a bind financially. And I remember at a time, they only had $93,000 to pay for public safety in the form of police.
That's correct.
And out of nowhere, they got their own police department now, and they got a whole bunch of other things. So how did that happen? From my understanding, they went downstate and they had some type of restructuring, or it was explained to me that they did something where they were able to get more money.
Yes.
Is that an option for us?
It's always an option. You can always go, the legislature loves to not really give us home rule, but give us special rules for everybody. You have a food and beverage tax, as the legislature said you could have it, but Highland can't. I'm bummed out about that, by the way. We have really good restaurants that charge a lot. We get some money, man. But what they don't understand is they always want to segregate the money for a specific purpose, which we welcome, because I don't know how you do some of the big financing. What they're not willing to do, it seems to me, is to give you a recurrent general revenue source for things like you're talking about, where the locally elected officials will answer to the electorate if they don't do right things with it. That's what elections are for. And that you have transparency with the citizens doing stuff like this. I love doing this kind of stuff. I will say one time, somebody said that I worked for, because I believe that all the people I'm working for, whether you voted for me or not, I'm working for you because you only get one of me at a time. They came into me and they said, I don't always understand everything you're saying, but that you know what you're doing, and I see what our cash balances are, I trust you. So I felt flattered. I'll tell you one thing a police chief said to me once that I have to say privately because it's a really cool compliment, but it's nasty. So I'll tell you another time. But anyway, I hope I was helpful. And you can talk to your council and your town manager about imaginative ways to do user charges.
Thank you.
Quick question for Megan. How are you going to pay the back taxes that hit both the school system and Hobart because of the big box store win for getting their assessed value changed? I understand it's millions of dollars. So how is that going to happen? And do I have to pay that as a Maryville homeowner?
So they did this in 2 phases. So the first phase to the first owners, they wanted it in a lump sum, so we had to take out a bond to pay that. So that's being paid over 10 years. The next portion is being taken out of our tax draws. So we will get roughly $1 million decreased from our tax monies to the schools for the next 5 years.
So basically, budget cuts or not having as much money for your budget that you would have.
Correct.
And so that presents a problem for us going forward. And not to be rude, but it's getting past my bedtime. So, yeah.
Maryville doesn't have big box stores. There aren't in TIF zones, so The school system would be kind of,
Actually, we do. So what happened was Myers got a break on taxes, and so did Costco,
yeah, they're in TIF zones, so
not Costco.
Costco is in a TIF zone. You look at the map, everything along I-65 on that side, on the east side of I-65
Wait,
is
Brian,
a TIF zone.
Brian, can you just ask the question though, and we can try to help answer what you're wanting to know?
To your point, when a government is assessing your value of your home, the only way that they can, to say that we don't increase tax rates, that might be true. It might be 2% or whatever, but as you increase the value of the home, I pay more. And that's what people are most concerned about. They don't really care what the tax rate is. They don't care about the this and that. They care about, I'm writing this check. Last year it was $1,500. This year it's $1,800. So, but I want to thank all of you. This has been very informative. There are a lot of people here in the audience that we have advanced degrees and fancy letters after our names and all that. But residents in general would like to have conversations like this, but it needs to be a little bit more simple. When you're talking about inflows, outflows, cash flows, abatements, all that, it's, for a lot of people, it's up here, and it's hard for them to conceptualize. And there seems to be a lot of pretending in government finance, which is beyond me, because most of us, if we make $2,000 a month and we have, $1,800 in bills, that means we get $200 to play. And so I would encourage us all, as we continue the conversation, let's try to make it a little bit more simple so that everybody can understand, and we don't get into these little esoteric discussions about, assessed value versus, this. So, but I want to thank everybody for your time. I appreciate the answers.
So, thank you, panel. Thank you, Michael. Again, there's cookies and water. Help yourself. The PowerPoint will be available on the town website within a day or two, so give us some time on that. We'll get it posted. And I can't thank all of you enough, and especially Michael, for your presentation.
pleasure.
So, thank you.
You all are wonderful. Thank you for being patient with me.